Chapter 71. It's time for the third version update in June. The entrance to the sands of time. Captain Wang of the Law Enforcement Bureau watched the strategy on the forum before him with a stern face, and only when he saw the score farming point in the second level did a flash of light suddenly cross his eyes. When you reach the first level's activation point, a prompt will sound in your ear, instructing players to hurry to the second activation point within 10 minutes. But in reality, as long as you take the cable car to the second activation point's platform within 10 minutes, you'll have successfully completed the mission. At this point, don't immediately enter the white light circle to trigger the next stage of the mission. You can choose to block the dried corpses at the exit of the corridor and farm a large number of points. The dried corpses on the steel cables are invincible, not everyone can take the cable car or the dried corpses will catch up for sure. Only send one person up to complete the mission while the others hold the exit of the corridor. There's a deep pit in the fourth level, which is a dried corpse respawn point. If you time it well and have a large-scale destructive prop, you can farm a large number of points. The strategy is very detailed. From the first level to the fifth level, all the things to watch out for, as well as some hidden rules, including where to farm points and a series of tricks, are all on this post. Without reservation. Captain Wang looked somewhat complexly away from the post before him. Chen Yi had asked for no benefit at all, telling them about his life for map pioneering experience with no reservations. Such vision, at least he might not have been able to do it. All players in Yanqing showed Chen Yi a favor. After taking a deep breath, he turned to his subordinates behind him and instructed in a low voice, "Pick 50 brothers with good skills and head down to this map together." Then he looked somewhat regretfully at the nearby artillery bed. It's a pity the artillery bed couldn't be brought into the map. Otherwise putting a few artillery pieces at the corridor exit would mean any dried corpses coming there would be killed, creating a huge score farming opportunity. The crossbow arrows driven by the motor, thick as arms, stabbed continuously forward without any sense of fatigue. Blocking such a cramped corridor exit couldn't be more appropriate. But the artillery bed was too bulky. According to Chen Yi's description, the corridors in the map consisted of staircases laid out in an ascending trend, complete with platforms and the like. The artillery bed just couldn't be brought in. Yet he had already sent this information back. Presumably, the Law Enforcement Bureau would soon arrange for factories to produce some corresponding quick farming tools. The glaring sunlight poured onto Chen Yi's face, pulling him from his sleep. He sat up, leaning against the head of the bed, rubbing his bleary eyes, and knocked on his head slightly dizzy. After drawing the curtains and looking out of the window, he paused slightly in place. Outside the window, everything had completely changed. Buildings were adorned with streamers, with nearly 100 meters of streamers falling straight from rooftops to the second or third floors. There were colorful balloons tied on the street lamps. The whole city looked a bit less desolate and a bit more lively. Have they gone mad? Chen Yi frowned, washed up briefly, and then stood by the window while brushing his teeth, looking down at these scenes. Only the Law Enforcement Bureau could mobilize the entire city like this. Not to mention the transportation and distribution of so many materials. Just the dismantling afterward would consume a lot of manpower. But after pondering for a bit and cleaning out the foam from his mouth, he sighed slightly and helplessly tapped on his head. Had he slept too long? Just getting out of bed, his head felt a bit fuzzy. He didn't immediately realize that it was almost June 1st, Children's Day. These preparations were probably for the Children's Day celebration. Was it an anticipation of some rules, thus the early preparations? He turned his head and glanced at the Tuberculosis Rabbit, which was also slowly waking up, and then noticed the message Captain Wang had sent him through friends. Yi. A new event has descended. Nearly 100 vending machines have suddenly appeared in Yanqing, similar to those self-service drink dispensers. You can accept tasks in front of the vending machines. For instance, hanging a streamer or tying a balloon to a street lamp. Buying a streamer or balloon costs 3 points each, and completing a task rewards you with 6 points. Many players have already started doing tasks. That was the message from Captain Wang. Chen Yi looked strangely at the time the message was sent, May 27, 1:29 am. He then looked at today's date. May 27, 9:28 am. Wait a minute. If his memory served, he had only exited the Sands of Time map on the afternoon of May 26, right? How long had he been asleep? Almost 20 hours. Chen Yi lit a cigarette, bringing it to his lips, and couldn't help but knock on his head and sigh, "Next time I can't be this exhausted when pioneering a map." Having pioneered a map, I need to sleep a long time to recover my vitality. Once the tuberculosis rabbit was done with its morning routine. The two didn't speak, having slept too long, their brains weren't completely clear yet. They just went down the stairs together. When they reached the ground floor, standing amidst the steel jungle, one could truly feel the shock brought by the city's transformation. Looking up, almost every tall building was draped with streamers. But there were limits, it seemed. Each building only had 10 very long streamers. After casually stopping a passerby to inquire, they learned that each building could only hang a maximum of 10 streamers, and each street lamp could only have 10 balloons tied to it. Like this, hey! The tuberculosis rabbit, hands in his pockets, glanced around at the tall buildings. In this case, it eliminates the possibility of score farming, otherwise these tall buildings would definitely be strung with at least a few hundred streamers. Chen Yi casually nodded, his eyes sweeping past a vending machine on the side of the road. This should be the place where Captain Wang said tasks could be received. But only these two kinds of tasks could be received, no other tasks were available. He didn't bother checking them. It seemed like the Snow Sea project team had started preparing for the Children's Day on June 1st. As for what would happen on the Children's Day on June 1st, that was anybody's guess. After wandering around with the tuberculosis rabbit for a while, Chen Yi found a restaurant to grab some food, and then headed back to his home. After all, there wasn't much worth wandering around for on the streets. And wherever he went, he was the absolute center of attention, with nearly everyone looking his way, making it difficult to enjoy a leisurely stroll. In the following days, Chen Yi and the tuberculosis rabbit didn't go anywhere. They just passed the time eating when they were hungry, sleeping when they were tired, and getting massages when they were bored. Time quickly advanced to May 31st. 23:49 in the evening. Chen Yi and the tuberculosis rabbit were each lying on their own beds, enjoying the massage from the banshee. The curtains were drawn, and the lights were off in the room. A scented candle had been lit on the desk, its comforting fragrance spreading throughout the room. Looks like it's about to hit midnight. Lying in the darkness, the tuberculosis rabbit savored the massage from the delicate and smooth hands pressing on his shoulders, before speaking wistfully. Too bad I can't chat with Yi, it takes away a third of the fun. It would be so comfortable if I could chat with Yi. He and Yi had activated the Banshee's feast prop that they had recently confiscated and were now enjoying the Banshee's massage. This prop was quite interesting. Once activated, they were pulled into an illusory realm, where a Banshee exclusive to them would massage their entire body for 30 minutes, helping to relieve physical fatigue. But it had many drawbacks. For instance, it was only an enjoyment for the mind, and after the massage, one could only feel mentally refreshed, while the physical fatigue was hard to remove. And it was impossible to communicate with other players who were pulled into the illusory realm. This was quite annoying. You can imagine the feeling of eagerly dragging your best buddy shoulder to shoulder to the third floor of a bathhouse, finding a double room, each ordering a masseuse. Preparing to enjoy an aromatherapy spa while shooting the breeze with your buddy. When suddenly you two are assigned to different rooms. It's utterly deflating. The pleasure is halved. Chen Yi, lying on the other bed, also contentedly enjoyed the massage from the Banshee. Actually, the setting was quite eerie. In pitch darkness, unable to see the Banshee's face. Only able to feel the Banshee's body, those delicate and soft hands, and occasionally hearing the moist breathing and that giggling laugh like a bell right by your ear. Under the oppressive rules of May, more than half of the people thrust into this environment. Forget half an hour. Would have an emotional breakdown in less than 3 minutes. But for Chen Yi and the tuberculosis rabbit, this turned out to be the perfect leisure and entertainment prop. With one fearless, the other so insensitive he couldn't even imagine a ghost, they could just feel the smoothness. This prop could only serve its intended purpose for these two people. It proved the saying. One man's poison, another man's meat. It wasn't long before. The darkness before their eyes began to visibly dissipate, and that feeling of comfort also started to fade. Is time up? Feeling the diminishing force of the feet on his back, the tuberculosis rabbit let out a sigh of regret as he sat up, tightening the towel around his lower half a bit, lit a cigarette, took a deep draw, then spoke reluctantly. Half an hour, how is that enough? I want to add more time. It's just points, and I'm not short on points. At least give me a chance to add more time. What kind of lousy prop is this? But I must say, the Banshee has some strength. The backstepping was pretty powerful. Just that my banshee is too skinny, if it were a bit fatter, that'd be better, I'm struggling here. Meanwhile, Chen Yi also got up from the bed, glanced at the clock beside the bed, then took off his towel, got dressed in his normal clothes, and stood by the window. He looked out at the city below. It's 23:59. In just one more minute, it'll be time for the third update of June. The Tuberculosis Rabbit, also having changed into his clothes and standing next to Yi, looked out at the brightly lit city with a serious expression. After pondering for a moment, he spoke up. Yi, how did you think of taking a bath, wrapping in a towel, lighting some incense, and then activating the banshee prop? The experience is indeed much more enhanced. Chapter 72. June version major update, new rules added. Chen Yi stood by the window, silent, merely lifting a glass of apple-flavored carrot juice to his lips. He took a peaceful sip. Clasping the glass in his hand, he gazed out the window. In one more minute, the June game update would arrive. Tonight, most people would probably be unable to sleep, as no one knew what the new rules coming with June would be. There was only one piece of good news. That was that all players finally didn't have to speak 1,000 sentences daily with people anymore. He glanced at his personal panel. There were 230,000 points, the entire points balance he had accumulated over the month. Chen Yi shifted his gaze away from the personal panel, placed the glass on the windowsill, and lit a cigarette between his fingers, unfastening the first button of his floral shirt. Hands propped on the edge of the windowsill, he calmly looked out the window. Looking down, it was clear to see that many people were standing in front of their balconies, waiting for the June update. It was unclear why everyone had to stand at the windowsill. Perhaps at such a time, seeing more of their own kind provided some sense of security. And at that moment, the time reached midnight. June 1st, had come. Game update announcement. The new version of Blue Star 4.2 will start a non-stop update at midnight on June 1st. The main contents and adjustments of this update are as follows. 1. Fixed the prohibition of gunpowder weapons. Some players began to develop electromagnetic weapons and other bugs. Effective immediately, both gunpowder and electromagnetic weapons are banned. 2. Fixed bugs in some maps. This bug fix includes the following maps. Fixed the bug where players could infinitely farm points at the Sands of Time map's second level. Fixed the bug where a little sprite's mom frequently intrudes on various maps. Corrected bugs such as the December neutral boss Santa Claus and his reindeer intruding into the May timeline. 3. Fixed the bugs performed by some players in May, such as escaping from Blue Star, force pulling them back, and adding an impenetrable air wall around the outer layer of Blue Star. 4. Added fashion gameplay. Starting from June, players will have more ways to obtain various fashion sets, and these sets contain different magical effects. Be a unique you. 5. Public testing of Map Secrets gameplay. In May, we conducted a small-scale internal test of the Map Secrets gameplay, with 90% of player feedback being extremely satisfied. In June, we are publicly testing Map Secrets gameplay. In June, players will encounter more maps and can venture into them to receive generous rewards. 6. Introduced Happy Silver Party gameplay. Over the past 2 months, we noticed many players engaged in unfettered actions relying on their strength. We detest this behavior and believe it tramples on personal dignity. Therefore, we launched the Happy Silver Party gameplay. You can choose to buy a Silver Party ticket and be transported into a huge banquet hall. Here, all players are anonymous and will wear masks that cannot be removed. Before entry, you will be invited to fill out an XP survey, and Big Data will assign you to the Silver Party hall that suits you best. You are free to choose your social interactions, with mutual selection leading to a shared journey. We hope this reduces some malicious actions. 7. Added a shop feature. Players can spend points to buy some basic props from the shop template in their personal panel, such as vehicles, fashion, passes, food, pure water, household items, and Silver Party tickets. 8. Over the past 2 months, we found many players wishing for customer service in the game. Hence, the Snow Sea project team decided to invite 10,000 players to serve as customer service representatives. We will provide simple training for customer service, and when players find obvious bugs, they can report to customer service. Reporters will receive different rewards depending on the order of reporting. Players who successfully serve as customer service will receive the special limited title Customer Service Messenger. Other players, bosses, and monsters cannot attack players with the Customer Service Messenger title. Players with the Customer Service Messenger title will permanently lose their ability to attack other players while serving as customer service, and cannot enter maps or attack bosses, monsters, etc. They can receive 3,000 points monthly, with a 9-to-5 schedule, weekends off, and triple paid leave during holidays, anniversaries, and major global events. Players can briefly outline their competitive advantages and send their resumes through the chat channel to the Snow Sea project team. The team will select 10,000 customer service representatives within 3 days. 9. Near larger player gatherings, there will be constantly respawning monster waves. These monsters will launch an attack on the gatherings when they accumulate in sufficient numbers. Players should clear these monsters in a timely fashion. 10. Between August to October, depending on project progress, we might initiate a player deployment operation to otherworldly battles. Please strengthen yourselves to ensure survival in these events. 11. Added the June rule: good rest habits. Players must sleep from 2100 hours to 2200 hours and wake up at 6 o'clock or before every day. Eat 3 meals a day at 8 am, 12 pm, and 6 pm. Prohibited from using self-comforting methods to deplete spiritual energy when alone. Players who breach any rule 3 times by the end of the month will receive 1 permanent debuff corresponding to the rule breached. You will always feel overwhelmingly sleepy, yet never be able to sleep. You will always feel hungry, yet never be able to eat. You will lose all desires, but your body will automatically expel spiritual energy 5 times a day. Should you breach all 3 rules 3 times each, you will have the honor of possessing all 3 permanent debuffs simultaneously. And receive the special limited title Tuberculosis Rabbit. And the title will be forcibly equipped and bound. The duration of this rule is 1 month, and it will be permanently taken offline after the next version update. 12. Due to different time zones, the zones will unify in June, and afterwards, all players' personal panels will have the accurate game time. Please adjust your schedules according to the time on your own personal panel and actively follow June's rules. 13. The Global Children's Day event on June 1st will officially start at 8 am on that day. The Snow Sea project team wishes all players a happy gaming experience in version 4.2. PS. Preview for the next update: the project team has decided to add monthly rules concerning emotions. Please look forward to it. 12:05. 12:10. 12:15. Finally, after a full 15 minutes, Tuberculosis Rabbit had gone over the contents of this version update word by word. His gradually widening mouth finally closed slowly. With a slightly dry mouth, he swallowed some saliva, unconsciously picked up the cup next to him, and took a big gulp of water. Then, tremblingly, he lit a cigarette and brought it to his lips. After taking a deep drag, he managed to calm the turbulence in his heart a bit, and with a complex expression, couldn't help but say, a full 13 items of update content. 13 items of update content, wow! Even browser games don't add this much stuff in one update. So, did the Snow Sea project team do nothing in May except think about how to add content for the June update? Couldn't you pace it out a bit? With so much content updated in 1 month, what are you going to update next month? Yee, I just counted, this version update has a full 2,000 characters. Do you think that when the Snow Sea project team was typing this many characters into the world announcement, their hands didn't get tired? And some of the rules are just nonsensical. Tuberculosis Rabbit couldn't help but express his indignation, especially the new rules for June, the so-called good daily routines, are really trapping people. What if we are clearing a map and it takes a little longer, but when it's time, we must go to sleep? If the boss isn't dead yet and is right beside you, do you sleep or not? And that thing about 3 meals a day. So if we get into a fight at 11:59 am, and then it hits 12 pm, do both sides have to put down their weapons and get together for a hot pot? Continue the fight after the hot pot meal, right? And if you don't eat, you get a permanent debuff. What if the fight hasn't finished by 10 pm? Does that mean the people who were just frenziedly waving their swords around will now all have to snuggle under the covers together? Then sleep until 6 am and get up to continue the fight? This is too absurd. What kind of ridiculous rule is this? I think it's even worse than the calm and cool rule of May. If it were possible, I'd prefer to have the active player rules of April back. This update is no good. Lousy designers. Chen Yi's eyes narrowed in silence, not speaking, as he kept tapping his fingers on the windowsill, leaning on his cane and looking out at the silhouettes in various windows. After a moment, he suddenly spoke. We need to find a cook as soon as possible. At least for this month, we must have a cook. If we don't have one in the wilderness or the map or in any place, and we don't have food when it's time, that would be bad. We can't possibly have food ready at all times. If things go as expected, I guess many powers or individual players will start to recruit cooks they know. We must act quickly. The hidden condition for visiting the map this month is that you must bring a cook. Without a cook, you wouldn't dare go into the map. Up until now, we still aren't clear on what food is supposed to be. Whether it should be freshly cooked food or if fast food products or rations would suffice. But a cook is definitely the most standard answer. We need to act immediately, right now. If we're a bit late, perhaps all the cooks in Yancheng will have been recruited by others. Actually, it doesn't have to be a cook, as long as they can cook food. But... He turned to look at Tuberculosis Rabbit and saw the silence in each other's eyes. Neither of them knew how to cook. Who could have imagined that a day would come in the future when a cook would become an extremely popular and necessary profession? It's utterly absurd. Chapter 73. Character Actions. The time now is the early hours of June 1st. Technically, they had already violated the June rules, but maybe because it was the first day, the violation count in the personal panel about the June rules was still 0. Quite humane. At least it wouldn't have all players violate the June rules just because the version had just updated. Chen Yi also first looked towards the new feature added in this version update, the store. Opening the store, there were all sorts of dazzling items for purchase, but they were all some basic functional props, things like attack skills and attack props were not available in the store. Which was understandable. After all, there's always been an unwritten rule in web games. The really good stuff was never directly for sale in the store. What could be directly sold in the store were only some functional props with not particularly strong effects. For example, the fashions in the store were only of E level, there were none above D level. Fashion name, beach warmth sunglasses. Fashion level, E level. Fashion sale price, 10 points. The price wasn't too steep. An E level fashion set would cost around 100 points, and purchasing a single component would only cost 10 points. This price was acceptable to most people. It wasn't expensive, and there were no issues with wearing it as everyday clothing. However, at this moment, Chen Yi and his companion suddenly noticed a dazzling white light exploding in the skies above Yancheng, followed by the light falling at a speed too fast for the naked eye to catch, straight into the depths of Yancheng. The shockwave of the white light surged rapidly in all directions. In almost an instant, it once again enveloped the entire Yancheng. As quickly as it came, it went. Just as Chen Yi had activated his sled from the backpack, preparing to jump on and start fleeing for his life, the white light suddenly dissipated. And they found that their bodies had not suffered any harm. It didn't seem like an attack. Wait a minute! Tuberculosis Rabbit suddenly exclaimed, looking down at his body with shock on his face, his hands covering his chest as he couldn't help but shout, "Where the hell did my clothes go?" Following the dispersal of the white light just now, Tuberculosis Rabbit's clothes had vanished without a trace. Completely bare, he only had a pair of white underpants. Even his shoes were gone. Chen Yi was in the same situation, his floral shirt dissipating with the wind, leaving only a pair of white underpants on his body. He looked down at the underpants and remained silent without speaking. It turned out to be a fashion item. Fashion name, beginner's briefs, male. Fashion level, none. Fashion effect, used to cover new players' modesty, no set effects, only covers the body. Fashion introduction, players can only wear clothing deemed as fashion, and players with experience in clothing design can design their own fashions and send the drawings to the Snow Sea project team. If selected, they will receive a substantial points reward. Yes. Just like when the vehicle function was activated and all the vehicles in the world disappeared. When the fashion function was activated, all the clothes in the world disappeared as well. Chen Yi stood by the bed and looked towards a woman standing at the window of the building opposite. Just like them. She was also devoid of clothes, wearing only a white bandeau and white underwear. That must be the beginner's fashion for female players. Wrapping cloth around oneself. Tuberculosis Rabbit tentatively pulled out a bedsheet and wrapped it around himself, wanting to see if this could be considered wearing something other than a fashion item. The answer was, it really could be. So although clothes had disappeared, using sheets, towels, and stuff like that was still a way to cover oneself. That's enough. Chen Yi shook his head unamusedly and transferred 2,000 points to Tuberculosis Rabbit. Go buy yourself a set of fashion in the store, we're not short of that bit of money. But the store only has E-level fashions now, just make do with them for now, and when we get a chance later, I'll get you a better set. Alright, thanks Yi. Tuberculosis Rabbit responded and immediately jumped onto the bed, sitting cross-legged against the headboard, constantly swiping through the store panel in front of him, considering which fashion set to purchase. Meanwhile, Chen Yi hesitantly looked at the teddy bear onesie in his backpack. C-level fashion. It was his only fashion item that had both a top and bottoms. He had also purchased 5 fashion treasure boxes during the Sands of Time event and had obtained 5 fashion components. One among them was the Emperor's new clothes, an item that simply couldn't be worn, not even worth considering. The remaining 4 were some decorative pieces from fashion sets, like sunglasses and such, none included tops or bottoms. The teddy bear onesie was the only thing that covered the body and was of C-level. It was just sleepwear, that shouldn't be a problem, and besides, it was brown, still quite masculine. The only issue was the teddy bear hood, which looked a bit cute, with 2 pink and white colored bear ears. After a moment of silence, Chen Yi chose to silently activate the item, accompanying a flash of white light. The fashion was now worn on his body. Standing in front of a full-length mirror, holding the Christmas cane in his hand, he looked at his reflection and slightly arched an eyebrow, feeling that the sense of incongruity wasn't that strong after all. Hey! It was just below the ankle where things got a bit bare. After that flash of white light, even shoes and socks had disappeared. What else could he do? Buy. He silently opened the store panel, looked at the fashion option, and found the shoe category in the fashion list. A series of icons dazzled his eyes. In the end, without much deliberation, he chose a pair of ordinary white sneakers. No special effects, an E-level fashion with no additional effects, just a piece of clothing. Clothes get dirty. If you want to clean your fashion, you can spend points to do so, and the cost varies with the fashion level. That should do it. He didn't buy too many fashions, as long as he was presentable. With shoes and a jumpsuit. What more was needed? It's better not to dress up too flashy as a man. Chen Yi silently lowered his own baseline a bit more towards the low key. And just at that moment, the excited voice of Tuberculosis Rabbit suddenly rang in his ears. Yi, look at me. Hey! Chen Yi shifted his gaze from the mirror where his handsome self was reflected and turned to look at Tuberculosis Rabbit standing in the living room, a hint of bafflement flashing in his eyes, not quite knowing what to make of it. There was Tuberculosis Rabbit, his head topped with a beach hat, wearing a white undershirt, over which he donned a red and yellow warm-toned palm tree shirt, along with a big red and yellow pair of beach shorts. His feet were in a pair of flip-flops. He also hung a pair of sunglasses on his white undershirt. Around his neck was a necklace that looked like something a rap artist would wear. But what was most outrageous? Tuberculosis Rabbit's legs were suddenly covered with tattoos. The 2 ink-filled legs were rather striking to the eye. Where did you get these tattoos from? Tattoos are also a fashion component, didn't you see them in the fashion store, Yi? Tuberculosis Rabbit curiously flicked through his backpack panel. I bought 2 sets of tattoos, one is this kind of flowered legs, to act like a gangster. The other is a sunshine series, a part of this outfit set. Let me switch to it and show you, Yi. With a virtual tap in the air with his finger. Tuberculosis Rabbit's leg tattoos faded away swiftly, quickly replaced by new ones. The new tattoos didn't cover the entirety of both legs. Featuring SpongeBob, waves, the sun, starfish, the moon, and other such sun-soaked patterns sporadically adorned Tuberculosis Rabbit's legs. It indeed matched Tuberculosis Rabbit's outfit quite well. The whole person looked like a tourist on vacation in Hawaii. Chen Yi was silent and didn't speak. He had to admit that Tuberculosis Rabbit really got the hang of the fashion feature, and he indeed hadn't noticed that there were tattoos when browsing the fashion store. There's more, there's more. Seeing Yi distracted, Tuberculosis Rabbit hurriedly waved his hands to pull Chen Yi's gaze back. Yi, check this out. Tuberculosis Rabbit stood still and snapped his fingers lightly. His lips suddenly curved upwards, his feet staggered forwards and backwards as he slowly leaned backward, tilting to nearly 45 degrees while his hands stretched out to balance his body, pupils shining with a challenge to nature as he gazed into the distance beyond the house. And the next second, a white circle of light, 2 to 3 meters in diameter, unexpectedly appeared under Tuberculosis Rabbit's feet and a 3D surfboard phantom sprang up beneath him. The waves could be seen rolling right under his feet, as if he was actually surfing. And you could even hear the sound of the waves and smell the slightly fishy scent of the ocean. That wasn't all. Behind Tuberculosis Rabbit, a translucent light wall gradually emerged, displaying a 3D animation of waves. From the front, it looked as though Tuberculosis Rabbit was truly surfing on a board, challenging 100-meter-high waves. About 7 or 8 seconds later, the light circle behind Tuberculosis Rabbit finally dispersed, the sea water under his feet vanished, and he slowly straightened up. "How's that?" Tuberculosis Rabbit's eyes sparkled with excitement and mischief as he began to smile. "This thing is also from the fashion store, called Character Action. The cheapest character actions start at 1000 points. Once activated, our bodies can strike certain poses, which will then bring up background special effects. There is also Michael Jackson's signature move for sale in the store, with a background effect featuring a huge dance hall and even includes backup dancers in the effect. This one is a bit pricier, it costs 10,000 points. There's also an upgraded luxury version of Michael Jackson's dance, including a full set of dance moves, as well as background music and such, priced at 50,000 points. When I get more points later on, I'll buy one to play with. There's also a character action of dribbling a ball between the legs for just 1000 points, and the luxurious upgrade version with background music and the like is a bit more expensive, costing 5000 points. This version update has brought many fun new things. Yi, aren't you going to try it out? Tuberculosis Rabbit looked outside the window with some reluctance. Isn't there a bunch of monster surges outside the city? Why don't we go kill some monsters now? I can't wait to earn more points. That way, I can unlock more fashion sets, as well as character actions and background effects. Chapter 74. A glimmer of cold light arrives first, then the spear strikes like a dragon. As Chen Yi was about to say something, suddenly the chat channel on his personal panel trembled. Yi, are you asleep? There are quite a few more monsters outside the city. My brother and I are fighting them outside. Do you want to join us, Yi? Chen Yi's eyebrows slightly raised as he turned his head to look at his reflection in the mirror, pondering for a moment before replying. Okay, send me the exact coordinates. Soon. Yi sent over the exact coordinates, followed by a playful expression with a sticking out tongue. Let's go. After Chen Yi got ready, he glanced at the Tuberculosis Rabbit next to him still browsing the fashion store. I'm heading out to fight monsters in the suburbs. Yi and the others are there too. Before leaving, feeling a chill around the crotch area, he bought an E-grade underwear from the fashion store to wear. The underwear didn't belong to any fashion set, it was a standalone piece. It was an optional purchase. But he was used to wearing it, so he bought a pair anyway since it wasn't expensive. Just 10 points. However, most players in Yanchinj didn't have spare points to spend, which meant that for a long time, most players in Yanchinj would have to experience a period of going commando. Sled activated. In just a few minutes, Chen Yi arrived at the coordinates provided by Ji. At first glance, there were quite a few monsters sprawled across the plains and forests on the outskirts of the suburbs, but each monster was spaced out, about 1 meter apart from the next, not as dense as an insectide. Minotaur monster. Standing about 2 meters tall, these muscle-bound bovines wielded enormous stone axes, dotting the plains with a formidable presence. Many players had also made their way over throughout the night. Almost all the players were uniformly clad in white boxer shorts, clutching all sorts of weapons, attacking the monsters either solo or in groups. The monsters' aggro was determined by distance and damage. Monsters would target the player who stepped into their territory and dealt the most damage to them. This also meant the possibility of kiting was present, and there was no need to worry about attracting the aggro of all the monsters by attacking one. By the time they arrived, quite a few players were looking admiringly at a certain player among the monsters, clapping and shouting continuously. Awesome, bro, your moves are slick. Kite another one, kite another one. Be careful, brother, don't get too greedy. The player who had garnered the attention of many was seriously wielding a dagger, eyes keenly watching the monster's attacking motion, and at the moment a strike was launched, the player quickly rolled under the monster. During the roll, the player lifted a hand and stabbed under the monster. While this player was bending and rolling, another Minotaur monster happened to catch up from behind. The full force strike meant for the player in the front landed heavily on the head of the chasing Minotaur monster from behind. Although the health bar was not visible, the scream of the monster hit conveyed that a significant amount of health had been lost. This player had impressively drawn the aggro of 4 monsters at once. With agile movements, the player continuously dodged, causing the 4 monsters to attack each other, gradually wearing down their health bars. The dagger in hand was opportunistic, targeting the monsters' vital areas with each stab. Every heavy blow from the monsters was narrowly avoided by the player. This player was Han Yu. Well done! The surrounding players were once again impressed by the scene, and a group of players in white boxer shorts started clapping and cheering again. As Han Yu heard the applause, the corners of her mouth twitched slightly, her heart was not at ease but was even more tense. Finally, after 1 minute, all 4 monsters collapsed almost simultaneously. Han Yu quickly gathered the items dropped by the monster corpses into her arms, heard the notification sound of points reward for killing a monster in her ear, and stood in place taking a relieved breath. Hearing the cheers from the crowd, pride flashed in her eyes as she looked towards her parents in the crowd, raising her dagger high into the air, her mouth opened in a silent shout. She was dressed in a black suit that she had bought for less than 100 points, and had also bought a set for her parents so that at their age, they wouldn't have to stand in front of everyone in newbie briefs. During the fight with Cupid, she had earned quite a few points. This amount of points was not much for her. Just at that moment, standing among the crowd, Han Yu suddenly noticed the crowd fall silent and looked up at the sky, pausing for a moment before also looking over her shoulder in the direction everyone was staring. Suspended in mid-air was a massive Christmas sled. And sitting on the sled were 2 men. One dressed in a teddy bear onesie, sporting more than a dozen titles over his head. The other clad in a beach outfit, with 3 or 4 titles floating above. Seeing the 2 men who had appeared behind her without notice, Han Yu froze for a second without speaking, just gripping her dagger tighter and with lips firmly pressed, eyes filled with tenacity and aspiration. She knew that man. Chen Yi. Although Chen Yi didn't know her, she had known about him for a long time. During the fight with Cupid, Chen Yi was ranked above her. When the insect tide came, Chen Yi single-handedly killed all of the insect race monsters. When the Sands of Time map appeared in the Yanqing suburbs, Chen Yi spent 3 days clearing the dungeon and left behind a guide for others. This man seemed like a mountain looming over all players in Yanqing, and also a mountain over her. Someday, she too wanted to be like Chen Yi, basking in the awe and admiration of all players, putting her own parents in the place that Chen Yi now occupied. This kid looks familiar. Sitting in the sleigh, the tuberculosis rabbit turned its head to look at Han Yu and couldn't help but click its tongue. I feel like I've seen it several times already. Being able to afford a fashion set at this stage means their strength mustn't be lacking. Why would they buy a suit if the main hand weapon is a dagger, though? It feels a bit out of place, doesn't it? As an assassin, opting for a white robe, like the one from the Assassin's Creed series, might look cooler. This black suit seems more suitable for someone whose main hand weapon is a spear, and then, upon launching the spear, they'd yell out. One gleam of cold light arrives first, followed by a spear like a dragon. The tuberculosis rabbit, perhaps imagining something, started gesturing in the air with its hands. Meanwhile, Chen Yi raised his eyebrows slightly and noticed Ji in the crowd. She was not hard to find. Amongst the newcomers in uniform white underpants, Ji sat on Tai Chui's shoulder in a suspender dress, barefoot, swinging her feet in boredom. She was quite the eyesore. With Tai Chui's build, it wasn't the least bit awkward for Ji to sit on his shoulder. Just like Nunu. It was clear that Ji had changed into the fashion set she had drawn in the Sands of Time. For some reason, she wasn't wearing shoes, and she had a bracelet made of willow branches on her fair wrist. She had a number of small accessories on her person. It looked like she had taken her time picking things out from the fashion store. And rightly so. Girls tend to be more interested in fashion stores, of course, though the tuberculosis rabbit also had a considerable interest in them. Chen Yi casually glanced at the players below who were looking up at him. Only then did he rise from his seat, resting one hand on his staff as he stood at the edge of the sleigh and said softly. Invincible under the heavens. In the next second, the Invincible under the heavens title effect activated, and a supreme yellow translucent staircase, starting from the edge of the sleigh, quickly extended towards Ji in the crowd, until it reached the ground in front of her. Then Chen Yi, with a calm expression, single-handedly leaned on his staff and stepped onto the staircase with steady and rhythmic strides, like a descending deity, walking towards Ji amidst the crowd. The tuberculosis rabbit also stood up, bringing a fist to their mouth to cough lightly, then changed its leg tattoos to floral patterns, dressed up in Hawaiian style, and followed behind Yi with a proud and upright posture. When this scene unfolded, the players below, looking up at Chen Yi, were stunned into silence, gazing at the sky ladder above their heads, awestruck. Was this thing also a prop? Why hadn't they ever seen it before? But upon seeing the endpoint of the sky ladder, that delicate girl in a suspender dress sitting on the broad-shouldered man, barefoot, the envy and jealousy in the eyes of the others intensified. A fine woman had fallen for some brute. Upon seeing the girl in the crowd who stood out so prominently, Han Yu felt a touch of quiet inferiority as he lowered his head, but the dagger in his hand gripped a bit tighter. Only a powerful man is worthy of such a woman. He too must grow stronger quickly. He too must find his own fair lady. The times were different now. Classes were no longer fixed. As long as one was willing to fight and had a bit of luck, anyone could leap across classes. He, Han Yu, would have his chance too. So showy. Li Yide, also standing amidst the crowd, couldn't help but feel irked as he shook the foxtail at his backside, lighting a cigarette and putting it to his lips. Everyone knows he's formidable, but does he have to flaunt it like this? It's really irritating. Look at those girls, their eyes are practically sparkling, and no one even notices the fashion set I bought for a hefty price. This feeling of being upstaged is really unpleasant. But on second thought, is that sky ladder a prop or a skill, and how did he get it? Do we have a chance of getting one too? I've never seen this thing in the Invincible Under the Heavens Points store event. Sorry to keep you waiting. Chen Yi descended the sky ladder, silently deactivated the staircase effect behind him, and as the ladder turned into a faint yellow dust that dissipated into smoke, he then looked towards Tai Chui and Ji in front of him, his lips lifting into a smile as he said, "Let's go, together to slay some monsters. Find more to read at Empire." He then pulled out a cigarette and offered it to Tai Chui. "Long time no see, brother. Brother, you look so commanding." Although Tai Chui was a bit slow, for some reason, he was very receptive to the gesture of being offered a cigarette, his eyes lighting up as he took the cigarette from Chen Yi's hand. He then looked at Chen Yi with a simple smile and gave him a thumbs up. Chen Yi chuckled softly and didn't reply. He had understood the principle of showcasing one's best while working hard behind the scenes since he was young. How about it? And then, Ji, who sat on Tai Chui's shoulders, wiggled her red nail-polished, delicate feet, drawing Chen Yi's gaze towards her. She looked at him expectantly and asked, "Does this fashion set look good?" Chapter 75. The cool spaghetti strap dress was a bit loose on Ji, giving off a hint of laziness while also not lacking in sexiness and innocence. The dress was purely white as its base, devoid of any lace edges or gradient layers. Its silk-like material allowed it to cling naturally to the body while also hanging down to reveal the figure. The neckline was not low, but a glimpse of allure could vaguely be seen, igniting endless imagination without being frivolous. A bracelet made of willow branches on the wrist added a splash of color to the otherwise simple spaghetti strap dress, while the pure gold thread in her right ear lost some innocence but gained some charm. A light makeup accompanied by long hair, which was loosely tied back with a rubber band. Any man faced with such a woman's full-eyed expectant inquiry would blurt out two words: beautiful. The fabric choice is quite bold. Chen Yi swept a surprised glance over the spaghetti strap dress on Ji. Generally speaking, we would call this kind of silk-like material a sleep dress. It's rare to see it used for spaghetti strap dresses. It's pretty. After all, it's a grade C fashion, not bad. Ji, sitting on Tai Chui's shoulder, was taken aback, her mouth opening and closing a few times, just as she was about to say something else. Suddenly, there was an outcry from around them. Chen Yi turned his head towards the source of the noise. He saw a man flying towards them, more precisely, a man standing on a flying sword. To be even more precise, it was a middle-aged man with an icy expression, his left hand behind his back, his right hand pinching the sword decree, dressed in a white tang suit, standing on a green longsword. The speed of the flying sword was not fast. It seemed intentional. The man standing on the flying sword descended slowly from above their heads, and even in the night, he was strikingly conspicuous. The title above the man's head was even more glaring. "I have a sword, who dares to respond?" The middle-aged man landed slowly on the ground, simply pinched a sword technique with one hand, and the green peak long sword under his feet trembled rapidly as if it had life, emitting a clear and soul-shaking sword cry. It then began to spin around the man's side, fast like a swimming dragon. Ever since the middle-aged man appeared, everyone who was fighting monsters in the night was shocked still, mouths agape. Even those engaged in combat quickly pulled away hostility and stood on tiptoes to gaze at this unexpectedly appearing figure. The man's white tang suit, paired with old-fashioned black cloth shoes, sparsely scattered beard around his lips, and his firm and icy countenance. That title over his head, along with the 3-foot Ching Feng as lifelike as any living being, made the man the focal point of everyone's attention from the moment he appeared. The noisy chatter also faded away in an instant, as if suppressed by the man's invisible aura. At that moment, "Go!" The man, with one hand behind his back, suddenly gave a cold order. His right hand, pinching the sword technique, thrust sharply at a minotaur monster not far ahead. Clang! The 3-foot Ching Feng hovering by the man's side vibrated wildly again and, with the sharp ring of the sword, it shot towards the minotaur monster at a speed invisible to the naked eye, leaving behind only a misty white trace carving through the air. When the crowd followed the direction the man pointed and looked at the minotaur monster, they noticed its pupils were slowly dilating and a tiny bloody hole on its forehead was oozing blood. The 3-foot Ching Feng had already returned to the man's side at some unknown time. It stood erect in the air, vibrated slightly as if it were a prized little treasure presenting its merits. In front of all eyes, the minotaur monster with a tiny hole in its forehead, its pupils dilating, and its body rigidly falling backwards, until it crashed onto the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. Wow! The crowd was suddenly abuzz. The minotaur monster, which they had been struggling against for a long time, was killed in one strike by this man. They couldn't even track the trajectory of the 3-foot Ching Feng. If the target of the 3-foot Ching Feng had been them, who could have dodged it? But it wasn't over yet. Suddenly, the middle-aged man, with one hand behind his back and standing in place, with no joy in his eyes as if he were used to it, gave a measured and respectful shout without any change in his expression. "Sword, rise!" The next second, the man's posture straightened even more, his eyes gazing into the distance, an unwarranted air of composure settled upon him, with one hand behind his back and the other pinching the sword decree across his chest. Shortly after, suddenly, the sound of a light and rhythmic DJ-style ancient music with a jianghe flair began to play. 3 feet of ice, how much frost and cold is required? A fleeting glance, how much hardship is needed? On this journey, do not forget the road one came from. As the rhythm started to quicken, and when the music reached a climactic moment, nearly 1,000 3-foot Ching Feng swords emerged suddenly behind the man. A sky full of green peak-long swords that blocked out the sun made many people scream and retreat in fear. Right then, countless ferocious monster beasts with heads raised and silently roaring with rage in their eyes appeared suddenly within dozens of meters of the middle-aged man, accompanied by the right hand gently lowering the sword decree of the middle-aged man. Sword, fall! Nearly 1,000 3-foot Ching Fengs behind the man started to tremble in unison, then, with a piercing sound, fell like an immense pressure from the air towards the raging monster beasts below. At this moment, the background music reached its climax, the sound growing louder, and the beats faster. Brocaded flowers bloom on the way home, do not hesitate. The swan takes flight, breaking through clouds and mists, among thousands of rivers and mountains. Feasting on frost, drinking the snow, forging for 10 years, honing a single sword. And see, as I stand alone at the pass, I dare to make tens of thousands unable to crack a smile. Explore stories on Empire. The countless monster beasts surrounding the man, in their silent roar, were turned into a bloody mess by the green peaks raining down from the sky. Nearly 1,000 green peak longswords, of varying heights, surrounded the man. They were akin to a sword tomb. And like vassals encircling their emperor, they slightly trembled their hilts in submission, willing to slay all enemies in the world for their emperor. At this moment, the background music also began to slowly fade, until several seconds later, the scene gradually dissipated. There was dead silence. All the players present even held their breath, daring not to speak loudly for fear of startling the immortals above. It was only now that these players realized that the countless 3-foot Ching Fengs in the sky, along with the sudden appearance of the monster beasts, were all but illusions. Unknown when. Within 100 meters of the man, there had long been no one. Only leaving behind that still standing 3-foot Ching Feng trembling slightly in mid-air next to the man. The man, with an easygoing look in his eyes, glanced over the crowd, and then chuckled lightly. My fellow deists, good night. After a moment of silent glances all around, the players began to whisper to each other uncontrollably. Is this still a human? Could it really be an immortal? I don't know, damn it, give me a moment. I always thought the world had turned into a game, but now you are telling me that the spiritual energy has revived and immortals have descended. What do we do then? According to the old rules, is this immortal here to test our spirit roots? That's excellent, the fortune teller has said since I was a child that apart from the fire attribute, I lack the other 4 elements. This means I'm definitely that 1 in 10,000 with a pure fire attribute spirit root. Meanwhile, in a corner among the crowd, Li Yide stood silently with no expression on his face. After a long while, he took out a cigarette from his pocket with a light sigh, slowly lit it, and put it to his lips. With a look full of melancholy and a distracted spirit, he stared into the distance and murmured. The road ahead is long and far-reaching indeed. He's really good at pretense. I thought Chen Yi was pretentious enough, but now there's someone even more ostentatious. What the hell are you guys doing? I thought I was well prepared, planning to make a grand appearance tonight while many people were gathering outside the city. I didn't expect that there would be such huge mountains ahead of me. He absent-mindedly swished his fox tail. After a moment, he couldn't help but lower his head in dejection and said. If you was born, why was Liang born as well? Shouldn't showing off imply inadvertently revealing one's badass side? Then with everyone in shock, you just give a slight smile to show it's just a basic maneuver. Isn't it popular anymore to pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger? Are we now into this kind of straightforward showing off? The type that unleashes their ultimate move upon meeting someone. When did the times change without letting me know? The tuberculosis rabbit also stood in silent, expressionless contemplation, with his hand halfway to lighting a cigarette, only resuming after the effects and background music had completely ended. But he did not proceed to light the cigarette. Instead, he took the cigarette from his lips and held it in his hand. He paused for a moment before he said faintly. There is no such character action in the fashion store. I don't know where this man got it, but the cost must not be small. With the range of effect this has, even including an appropriate background music and plot for the effects. This effect must be worth at least 50,000 points. But I can't take it anymore. This man is too good at pretense. Since I was born, I have never seen such a master of pretense. Chen Yi also stood there with a complex expression, looking towards the middle-aged man who was standing by himself in the clearing, leaning on his walking stick without speaking. Damn it! That character action is truly awesome. No, he too must get a character action that's as cool as that one. The kind you can buy from the store that everyone has, the common merchandise, definitely won't do. He must get a character action that's as rare as the one this man has, which isn't available in the store. However, just at this moment, the middle-aged man turned around, smiled at Chen Yi, then proceeded to walk straight towards Chen Yi and the others, with the 3-foot Qing Feng floating behind him following as though it were his shadow. He came to a halt 2 meters away from Chen Yi and the others, then stood there with an amiable expression, chuckling lightly. My young friends, Before the man could finish speaking. Hold it! Standing beside Chen Yi, the tuberculosis rabbit suddenly stood up straight, her face cold as she gave a soft shout, then bent her knees slightly and leaped straight up on the spot, pulling out the crimson claw knife, which had been charging up to nearly 5,000 points, from her bosom while in mid-air. Before the leap, she flicked the cigarette in her palm with the handle of the knife, sending it flying through the air. Her body bent like a bow at the extreme angle, catching the lit cigarette in her mouth and stretching out her arm holding the claw knife like a whip, lashing it through the air towards a distant minotaur monster. Knife, cries. And see how I cut down all the devils in this world. Give me. Extinction. Chapter 76. Global. Unique. Character action. The tuberculosis rabbit leaping in midair became increasingly frenzied, his voice tinged with a hint of contempt for life, his eyes flashing with ruthless brutality. The crimson glow of the cigarette butt at the corner of his mouth, shrouded in the light blue smoke, began to spread gradually, exploding in an instant. In a flash, a crimson blade light, tens of meters wide, abruptly appeared in midair. The intense crimson light illuminated half the sky outside the city in an instant. And with that, the night was dispersed. The dark clouds retreated. As if a red moon had descended upon the world, even the ground was bathed in the scarlet glow, and the players who stood agape, looking up at the blade light in the sky, seemed eerily immobile, as if their minds were affected by the red moon. Before the crowd could react, the tens of meters wide, crimson crescent blade light, like Mount Tai bearing down, plunged toward the distant minotaur monster. All players' pupils captured the same astonishing scene at this moment. A crimson crescent blade light that nearly filled their entire field of vision. As the crescent blade light crashed mightily into the group of minotaur monsters, those that had been strutting arrogantly just moments before burst open like balloons filled with blood, becoming a shower of gore in the air. The crimson blade's momentum was unabated. After annihilating countless minotaurs and even carving a shallow pit into the ground, the light slowly faded away in midair. Where there had been a large group of minotaur monsters at the outskirts of the city, the tuberculosis rabbit had brutally cleaved a clearing, making the scene look like a middle-aged man's bald spot. The blood splatter from the fallen minotaur monsters stained the clearing like tomato sauce slathered on a middle-aged man's bald head, with scattered cheese sprinkles added instantly. The middle-aged man, who had just started to speak and was cut off, looked at the scene before him, involuntarily swallowing his saliva unconsciously, with a flash of shock in his eyes. His once upright back bent slightly without him noticing. "Do you need something?" He heard an abrupt voice next to his ear. The middle-aged man snapped back to his senses, his voice stammering as he looked towards the tuberculosis rabbit and said subconsciously, "That. I'm looking for the person who was standing next to you just now, Where did he go?" The man from before was clearly standing right beside this fellow. Just as he was sweeping his gaze around the tuberculosis rabbit, preparing to look around, he suddenly heard a steady and powerful male voice beside his ear. "Is there something you need?" The middle-aged man, looking in the direction of the voice, was about to speak when the shock in his eyes intensified, and he seemed a bit lost and helpless for a moment, not knowing what to do. Only a few dozen meters away, a throne swathed in crimson, exuding dominance and majesty, had risen without notice. And the man he was looking for, who had just been wearing a one-piece bare pajama set, was now clad in a blue robe with a cold expression, sitting on the throne and playing with an agar-wood bracelet. His pupils flickered with lightning serpents that no one dared look directly into. From high above, looking down at him with a gaze full of disdain. And below the throne, nearly 100 heavy armored soldiers, wielding giant blades, stood like statues on both sides of the throne, exuding an air of iron-blooded ruthlessness, as if they were dead soldiers, ready to protect their emperor. They looked straight ahead, unwavering. Though silent, the pressure they emitted was not to be underestimated. And beside the man seated on the throne was a petite girl in a stroppy long dress and bare feet, cradling a jar of wine, head bowed as she filled a bronze flagon with wine. Like a queen, she gently handed the flagon to the man beside her. After taking a sip from the flagon, the lightning serpents in the man's eyes became more violent, and he spoke coldly with a slight dissatisfaction in his tone. "Why art thou here? Glug. Your journey continues at Empire." The middle-aged man swallowed hard and looked toward the man sitting on the throne, as well as the several titles almost breaking through the sky, shocked, while he glanced at the surrounding players who were all staring in this direction. With some embarrassment, he jogged his way toward the throne. The heavy armored soldiers standing on both sides of the throne stomped their blades heavily on the ground as the middle-aged man ran toward it, their eyes fixed on him intently. It seemed as if they were ready to draw their blades at the slightest provocation. The middle-aged man didn't care but ran to the foot of the throne with his head down, looking up at the man sitting above him and said in a low and awkward voice, "Ah, brother, it seems we share the same hobbies. Cut me some slack, I'm having a hard time saving face here." "Oh." Chen Yi nodded expressionlessly, looking down at the man standing before his throne and said coldly, "Now you realize you can't save face, what about earlier? Flitting about with your sword flight, thousands of swords flying together. Are you cultivating or did you come specially to show off before me? Yanchinch hasn't seen anyone like you before. Are you from another city who came all this way to perform in front of me? Your special effects cover nearly 100 meters, those 3-foot Qing Feng swords are nearly sticking out of my forehead, and now you're running over here asking for a favor. This is difficult, you know." Cough. The middle-aged man stood there, feeling the gazes of countless other players on him, fidgeting uncomfortably and said, trying to maintain his composure, "I was somewhat out of line. Actually, I'm here specifically to find you. I'm almost done collecting a set of fashion components, only missing the final fashion component. But it's very hard to get this component, He paused momentarily before continuing, "Well, it's not too hard to obtain per se, it's just a bit difficult, not really difficult to obtain, actually quite easy to get, just a touch hard to lay hands on. I learned through a certain prop that you have this fashion component, so I rushed over without stopping. I hope to make a trade with you." I'm willing to offer a fair price to buy that fashion component from you. I'm here with the sincere intent to trade, don't worry, I'm definitely not thinking about strong-arming you for it. Which one? Chen Yi's eyelids twitched slightly as he glanced at the middle-aged man seated below the throne, his mind already covertly contemplating how to make his offer. If he hadn't misunderstood, how many were missing? Just one? A fashion set composed of multiple fashion components, and he's just missing one? And that one is in his hands? Did he really come all this way just to find him? Then he'd have to give the price a good thought. Ah, the agarwood bracelet you have there. Oh. Chen Yi looked down at the agarwood bracelet in his hand, an item he'd obtained from the Sands of Time fashion chest the last time, which belonged to the wrist accessory category within a fashion set. He hadn't really paid it much attention. He had just taken it out earlier on to assert his presence, just for show. But now, it seemed like it might actually be valuable. Fashion name, under one person agarwood bracelet. Fashion level, C class. Fashion effect, when wearing any single item from the set, it greatly enhances the wearer's sense of balance, and collecting all items of the set will unlock the complete set effects. Fashion introduction, below only one person, yet invincible under the heavens, and that person shall be tomorrow's me. For fashion sets ranked D class and above, wearing an item from the set will provide some effects. C class is the same, only that C class sets add a set effect. The set effect is something that E class and D class sets lack. As for E class sets, they don't even have individual item effects. They are purely a set of clothes. The green robe he was wearing was just hurriedly picked out from the fashion store as a temporary replacement for his little bear pajamas. When equipped with different fashion items, not every fashion item's effect will be triggered, but priority will be given to the one with the highest level. As for two C-class fashion items, how the system determines which item has the higher level is something the player won't see, but the system knows. Just like how there's a difference between C-class skills, even though they're all C-class. You're talking about this. Chen Yi swayed the agarwood bracelet in his hand and, after seeing the middle-aged man in front of the throne nod, he chuckled, sure thing, 100,000 points. The middle-aged man stood there, stunned, a touch of disbelief flickering in his eyes, raising his voice involuntarily, are you crazy? A C-class fashion single piece for 100,000 points. My life isn't even worth that much. But immediately after, when he saw Chen Yi's eyes gradually turning cold, he bit his lip and hesitated where he stood. If he could get this fashion component, he would complete the set. To a collector, missing just one piece from a complete set and being unable to find it, that's something that could keep him awake all night. And with the June rules forcing you to sleep between 9 and 10 p.m., if he couldn't sleep, that would be a serious problem. He didn't want another title saying sick unto death. To appear above the one on his head that reads I have a sword, who dares respond? But 100,000 points, that was just too much. Not to say he wasn't willing, even if he was, he couldn't possibly have that many points. After hesitating for a long while, the middle-aged man ventured, let's make it a deal, how about 2,000 points? Look up to the sky. Chen Yi's face remained calm as he pointed towards the multitude of glowing, glittering titles above his head, see that? You think I'm short of just a few points? The middle-aged man looked up at the pillar-like titles above, then froze again, realizing that indeed, Chen Yi probably wasn't short on those 2,000 points, but those 2,000 points were nearly all his savings. Earning points in May is no easy feat, okay. How about this? He suddenly exhaled a long breath, looking up gravely at Chen Yi, I'll give you a pass, this pass allows you to go to a special map. That map, it poses significant risks to your life. As for the map reward, others might not be interested, but I believe you definitely will be. My unique character action that has an effect within nearly 100 meters was obtained from that map. It's a globally unique character action. The reward for that map is just one type, character actions, with the highest level reward being a globally unique character action. This price should be enough to satisfy you, right? Chen Yi sat on the throne, leaning back slowly in his chair, his expression placid without speaking, slowly closing his eyes and fiddling with the beads of his agarwood bracelet, unconsciously tapping the armrest of the chair. At this moment, his mind was filled with just a few repeating words. Globally unique character action. What a joke. He bloody needed that thing. Chapter 77. You like to carry with one hand behind your back, right? Chen Yi, seated on the frozen throne, did not speak. He just leaned back in the chair, his eyes tightly closed, his mind uncontrollably conjuring the image of himself appearing before the public with a special effect spanning 100 meters. What a sight that was! The swagger, if not displayed several times in one's life, would surely be a life lived in vain. He did not know how much time had passed. A cautious, probing voice finally came from beneath the throne. Are you not satisfied? Show it to me. Chen Yi slowly opened his eyes and looked down calmly at the man standing before the throne. Okay. The middle-aged man took out a card-like pass from his bosom and suddenly, with a serious expression, barked, "Go." The next second, his wrist flicked violently, and the pass was flung several meters into the air above his head. As the surrounding players lifted their gazes unconsciously toward the teal card suspended mid-air. Clang! A crisp sword chime suddenly rang out. The 3-foot Qing Feng sword, like a swimming dragon, soared upwards from behind the middle-aged man, its blade catching the pass steadily before shooting towards Chen Yi with force. And it stopped abruptly less than 3 fists away from him. Please, friend, take a look. With a demeanor neither servile nor overbearing, Chen Yi sat on the throne as if he had no intention of dodging at all, merely retracting the cigarette in his palm that provided 1 second of invincibility back into his sleeve unnoticed. And internally, he made a mental note of this middle-aged man's actions. A challenge, is it? He did not say much, but reached out to take the pass on the sword's edge and looked at its panel description. Prop name, Life Theater Pass. Prop level, C class. Prop effect, with this pass, one can go to the map Life Theater from any location. Each player can only receive a reward once inside the map. After receiving the reward, one cannot enter the map again. Prop restrictions, remaining uses, 5/10. Prop introduction, life is but a play, but who knows that your life is of the restricted kind? Chen Yi raised an eyebrow and did not speak. A C-class map? A map that could produce a globally unique character action, and it's just a C-class? But then he thought that at this point in time, most people probably wanted things to enhance their combat power, not character actions that were utterly useless for combat power. It made sense then why this map was only a C class, as gimmicky items were superficial, while only those that could enhance one's combat power were truly substantial. Even if the special effects covered a larger area. They were just special effects, after all. Unable to inflict even the slightest damage on the enemy. For the lone wolf players who prize strength, risking their lives to enter the map and struggling to obtain such a reward was simply an insult to their intelligence. But for the show-off faction, as long as the map was not certain death, they had to break through it, regardless of the consequences. However, this remaining count of 5? Before Chen Yi could ask, the middle-aged man beneath the throne began to explain, a person can only receive a reward once in this map. Not only is there a globally unique character action in this map, there are also other character actions. I gave up the reward for ordinary character actions 4 times in a row, and finally obtained the globally unique character action reward on the 5th attempt. But I can no longer enter this map. Once a reward has been taken, one cannot re-enter, as it is a single-player map that only allows 1 player at a time. Good. After pondering for a moment, Chen Yi tossed the agar-wood bracelet in his hand to Tuberculosis Rabbit to pass it to the middle-aged man below, and pocketed the pass, saying softly, "The trade is complete." The middle-aged man who received the agar-wood bracelet finally let his heart settle down, a trace of gratitude flashing in his eyes as he looked at Chen Yi. "Thanks, I took a bit of an advantage in this trade, consider it a favor I owe you." He originally thought that Chen Yi would attempt to haggle further. After all, although the pass was valuable, he could no longer use it, which meant he had effectively exchanged a prop he could not use for one he desperately needed. No matter how one looked at it, he was making a huge profit. In this situation, Chen Yi's choice not to haggle further, avoiding making the trade any more difficult, left him feeling grateful. Then the middle-aged man stood in place, with his left hand behind his back and his right hand forming a sword technique, gazed upward solemnly at Chen Yi and declared, "Before coming here, I did not know this prop was in your possession. I know your name. Chen Yi, the first player to appear on the global announcement, the top person on the global vehicle leaderboard. My name is Sword Without End. Let's say we've met this time, and I'll throw in an additional piece of news for you. It seems you might not be aware of this, but there's a player team formed spontaneously in later times that is recruiting powerful players globally. Its purpose is for players to unite, tackle those high difficulty maps together, and assist each other in the struggle to survive. I'm also a member. Perhaps someone will find you later. Till we meet again. With the end of his words, there suddenly came a deep drumming sound from beyond the horizon, striking at the heart of every player, instantly quieting the scene. And overhead, clouds had gathered, nearly covering all the players. It felt as if dark clouds were looming over the city, threatening to break it apart. Sword Without End stood with one hand behind his back, proudly lifting his gaze to the black clouds above, then suddenly spoke in a dramatic and powerful tone, clear as if it were ringing right beside every player's ear, proclaiming: 30,000 daos, the sword is supreme. Grasping the sun and moon to pick the stars, in this world, there is none other like me. The next second, countless thunder dragons, their expressions fierce, burst forth from the clouds, carrying a world-ending force and a terrifying pressure as they hurtled straight toward Sword Without End amidst the crowd. Under the overwhelming might between heaven and earth, human strength seemed incredibly insignificant. Many players were temporarily unable to discern reality from illusion, fleeing frantically in all directions with terrified expressions. And once again, Sword Without End's shout echoed. A sword's chill spans 19 provinces, sword chi cutting across 30,000 miles. Sword, come forth. Thousands of 3-foot Qing Feng swords appeared beside Sword Without End, and as he clenched the sword technique in his right hand, he thrust violently towards the countless thunder dragons in the sky. The thousands of 3-foot Qing Feng soared like dragons, spiraling upward, slaying thunder dragons, tearing through dark clouds. The dark clouds were suddenly ripped apart, blinding light piercing through as if the moon shone brightly after piercing the dark clouds. Immediately following, Sword Without End, who had been standing in place, now had a trembling 3-foot Qing Feng under his feet, shooting forth at a speed too fast to catch, towards the distance, leaving behind only a slowly fading streak of green afterglow. And that solemn and powerful parting phrase: "Fellow deists, good night." It was only several seconds later when everything slowly dissipated and returned to normal, including the minotaur monsters below who seemed somewhat dazedly looking up at the sky. They were somewhat unclear about the situation. Fourth on the global vehicle leaderboard, Traceless Green Peak. C-Class Vehicle. Tuberculosis Rabbit looked towards the global vehicle leaderboard, and spoke expressionlessly, "The 3-foot Qing Feng under Sword Without End's feet is named Traceless Green Peak, with a rating of 2890. It's just over 1,000 points lower than your vehicle's rating, Yi. It must be a special vehicle, capable of not only transporting people but also being used for attacks, and it even seems to have some sword flying techniques. The basic score for a C-Class prop is only 1,000 points. He must have upgraded it for it to reach a score of 2890. But I can't see any signs of modification, don't know what options were modified. That green afterglow, it must be similar to the colorful flame tail you have, Yi, and belongs to one of the vehicle's trailing effects. As for his departing special effect, whether it's character action or title effect, it's a bit hard to tell. But his title seems to hold some substance, likely not a weak effect. For such an ostentatious title, it must be backed by some solid qualities." After a brief pause, Tuberculosis Rabbit then sighed deeply, "I'm starting to get annoyed, this person is just too pretentious." Chen Yi didn't say anything, just waved his hand to have the soldiers flanking the throne move out to surround and attack the minotaur monsters. Then he turned to look at Ji standing beside the throne, a smile suddenly curling the corners of his mouth. "Why did you suddenly decide to improvise? There was no time earlier." He had to complete changing costumes, creating distance, managing expressions, and other meticulous actions, all while Tuberculosis Rabbit was drawing everyone's attention, leaving no time to communicate with Ji. The act of Ji pouring wine for him had been completely improvised by Ji himself. But it must be said, the effect was excellent. Hee. Ji stood next to the throne's armrest, clutching the hem of her dress with smiling eyes, letting out a bell-like laugh before raising an eyebrow, "Because I guessed what you were thinking, that's why. How was it, did I play the role of the queen convincingly?" "The queen?" Chen Yi looked surprised as he turned to look at Ji. "You were playing the queen? I thought you were a maid." Ji's smile suddenly froze in place, with a flash of speechlessness in her eyes, a bit unsure how to respond. At this moment, Chen Yi also noticed the anomaly beneath Ji's feet. He saw that Ji's feet had never actually touched the ground. When she was in the air, she was barefoot, but upon walking on the ground, there would appear two spontaneously manifesting waves, carrying Ji forward. Any dust that sometimes settled was quickly washed away by the water waves. It turned out they were real waves, not just effects. What do you think? Noticing Chen Yi's gaze, Ji's eyes curved like crescents. She looked down at the two constantly rolling waves under her feet with satisfaction and smiled happily. Do they look nice? This is the fashion effect of my C-class stroppy dress. No need to wear shoes, no chance of getting sore feet, and it even increases movement speed. Is it fresh water? Chen Yi asked, his brow slightly furrowed. Ah! Ji paused in place for a moment, not quite understanding what he meant. I mean, are those two rolling waves under your feet fresh water or salt water? If it's fresh water, it's no problem. Could even be used as a water resource in critical times. But if it's salt water, that's a bit troublesome, as prolonged soaking in salt water can erode the skin. Fresh water is sweet, salt water is salty. Taste them, and you'll know if it's fresh water or salt water. Ji stood silently in place, her body slightly rigid, not speaking or knowing what to say. And just then, the players finally started to come to their senses as if waking from a dream and resumed the previous commotion, chatting while raising their cleavers high to face the nearby minotaur monsters. Isn't that nice? Li Yide stood in place, one hand behind his back, musing dreamily. Everyone likes to keep one hand behind their back, hey. Is it like your arm's broken and in a cast, unable to come back out? Got hemorrhoids itching or something? Why not tuck all your limbs behind your back instead? Little Lu, we need to start acting too, otherwise, look at those mountains ahead, they're pressing down on people so much they can barely breathe. Chapter 78. Is this too open? The crowd bustled about. After the liveliness of days gone by had faded, although players were still chatting incessantly, their hands were earnestly combating the minotaur monsters before them. At 8 a.m., the June 1st Children's Day event would officially kick off. Grinding for more points tonight would also provide more leverage to deal with the fresh challenges of June. Beyond that, there were many things to test out. Like the definition of food, does it have to be cooked, or can dry and fast food products also qualify? Or the meaning of having dinner at 8 p.m., does it have to start at 8 p.m., or is it just after 8 p.m., and are there any specific rules about dinner timing? Then there's the June rule that mandates sleep must be between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. and waking before 6 a.m. So, can one start sleeping at 3 p.m. and wake up at midnight? After all, that also fits the element of being in dreamland between 9 and 10 p.m. and getting up before 6 a.m. Players need to try out these somewhat ambiguous rules themselves, but fortunately, they have 3 chances to err, which greatly reduces the cost of trial and error. Of course, all that needs to be put off until June 2nd. On June 1st, due to the rules taking effect in the wee hours, all players have a one-time exemption from the rules, meaning on the first day, the June rules do not apply. There is now a lot that can be purchased in the personal panels store. That includes food, water resources, and so forth. People no longer worry about the lack of fresh food sources, but these items must all be purchased with points. So far, the only way to acquire points has been by slaying the monsters outside the city. There used to be another daily task under the April rules called Active Expert, which awarded 1 point per day. But now that the April rules are offline, that source of points can be said to have completely dried up. Luckily, these monsters outside the city refresh incessantly, utterly impossible to wipe out, and in the short term are quite a decent source of points. Just then, all players near Yanchinj suddenly heard a prompt by their ears. Ding! Congratulations to Yanchinj for successfully completing the main city task. All players may proceed to the task window at Yanchinj Central Square to receive tasks, complete them actively for a generous reward. Tuberculosis Rabbit, pulling out a cigarette from his pocket and casually lighting it, exhaled a long puff of smoke before speaking with some confusion. Yanchinj successfully completed the main city task. What main city task? How come we don't know anything about this? But when we head back later, we can see what tasks there are. Afterward, he glanced at Ji, who was idly swinging her legs at the side of the frozen throne, hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a small card from his pocket and quickly stuffed it into Yi's hands. He kept winking and signaling with his eyes. What? Chen Yi glanced at Tuberculosis Rabbit's peculiar expression, suddenly thought of something, coughed lightly, and turned his body slightly away from Ji to look at the small card in his hands. Prop name, Silver Party Ticket. Prop rank, E grade. Prop effect, after activation, it can transport the player to a venue and comes with an unremovable mask, with a maximum stay of 12 hours. Prop description: whether absurd or ridiculous, when the moonlight unfolds before your eyes, to not appreciate it would seem somewhat charmless. Prop price: sold directly in the store for 100 points. Just as he suspected, it was indeed the thing he had thought of. Chen Yi looked up at Tuberculosis Rabbit with an awkward expression, noting the eagerness in his eyes. Wait, that's not just eagerness. It was practically impatience. With this thought, he shifted his position again so as not to draw Ji's attention. After all, it's better to avoid such matters in front of the girls. However, just then, a crisp voice from Ji came from behind. A silver party ticket? I bought one the moment the store arrived. It wasn't expensive, just 100 points. Ah! Tuberculosis Rabbit froze, his jaw dropping to the ground, his mouth wide open in disbelief. He turned his head to look at Ji, who was serious and wearing dungarees, and his throat went dry, unable to utter a word. You. This. What the hell is going on? Even Chen Yi felt as if he'd been struck by lightning, first kicking Tuberculosis Rabbit's dropped jaw back into place, then turning around stiffly to face Ji. It was as if he were seeing the girl before him in a new light. Isn't she a bit too open-minded? What are you thinking? Ji saw the looks from Chen Yi and Tuberculosis Rabbit, her brow furrowing with slight dissatisfaction before she hesitated on the spot, taking a while before she said. I bought one for my brother. I want him to have some fun. He was born with cerebral palsy. Not only is his thinking on par with a child's, but his speech is also unclear, preventing him from finding a wife. He's so old and still doesn't have a wife. Every time I think of this, I remember the dog I used to have. I never let him taste meat in his life, which is kind of sad. So that's why I thought of letting my brother go in and have fun. Besides, it's a two-way selection, so it can't be considered disrespectful to the other ladies, right? And if we're not considering being together for long, at nearly 2 meters tall, my brother should be quite popular in there. Chen Yi and Tuberculosis Rabbit stood silent, not saying a word. Seconds later, both lit up a cigarette and brought it to their lips, inhaled deeply in unison, and then gazed together, with a glassy look, up at the bright moon in the night sky at a 45-degree angle, before exhaling a puff of pale blue smoke together. In their shared melancholy, they remained silent. All was understood without words. To speak or not to speak, that is the hesitation. That's exactly the situation right now. Hey! Ji's tone carried a hint of dissatisfaction as she stressed, you guys, don't make those faces, okay? He's really pitiful. You have no idea what someone with cerebral palsy has to go through on a daily basis. Otherwise, why do you think my brother felt so close to you the first time he met you? Isn't it because you gave him a cigarette? When selling fish, regular customers often give cigarettes to other vendors and chat a bit about everyday things, but no one has ever given my brother a cigarette, and even when they talk to him, it's in a mocking tone. Customers often come to mockingly ask my brother what 7 plus 8 is. Every time someone gives other vendors a cigarette, my brother just sits on the stool staring, hoping someone would offer him one too. In his heart, offering a cigarette is a brotherly form of recognition. So that's why he felt so close to you the first time he met you on the helicopter, because you gave him a cigarette right when you met. My brother doesn't actually smoke at all. Those few cigarettes you gave him, he's kept them all hidden in an iron box, tucked away in the deepest pocket against his chest. He's already so pitiful. What's wrong with letting him have a little fun inside? Besides, isn't it a mutual choice in there? Have I done something wrong? Why are you looking like that? At this point, Ji's voice trembled slightly, faintly carrying the sound of tears, evidently overwhelmed by the accumulation of past events before the game transformed her. Well? Chen Yi hesitated, raising his hand halfway, his mouth opened and closed a few times in reticence before he let out a sigh of resignation. You've misunderstood us. The reason we did that, it's a little game Tuberculosis Rabbit and I often play where we mimic each other's actions to see how in sync we are. I wholeheartedly approve of this, no objections. Tai Chui is my brother too. This way. Chen Yi threw the ticket he had in his arms to Tuberculosis Rabbit and earnestly instructed him, I'm giving you a task, take brother Tai Chui to play inside tonight. Just make sure to return by 7 AM tomorrow. Make sure brother Tai Chui has a blast. Ah! Tuberculosis Rabbit paused, looking toward Tai Chui not far away, who was forcefully tossing a minotaur monster high into the air, then leaping up on the spot and, while bellowing, punched the minotaur's head straight into a deep pit in the ground. Swallowing hard, a glint of confusion flashed in his eyes. Isn't that a bit too fierce? Are we really going? Otherwise. Chen Yi sat calmly on the frozen throne and said softly, "Don't you want to go?" "I want to, it's just that I..." "Never mind." Biting the bullet, Tuberculosis Rabbit gripped the silver party ticket in his hand and strode toward Tai Chui, who was still fighting in the distance. Actually, he wanted to go with Yi. Chatting and playing together, what could be better? Going with Tai Chui somehow felt less fun. He preferred the conversations with Yi, as the others didn't quite get the points he was trying to make. But since Yi had instructed him, there was no reason to not follow through. 3 minutes later, Tuberculosis Rabbit and Tai Chui vanished in a flash of white light, not drawing any attention. So this is the place. As the sensation of weightlessness beneath his feet slowly dissipated, Tuberculosis Rabbit opened his eyes and surveyed his surroundings. He saw a massive hall in front of him, about half the size of a soccer field. It looked very elegant. There was even a full orchestra performing on the stage. The elegant violin music almost subconsciously made one think of fastening a bow tie. Beneath were several small round tables. The round tables were laid with a variety of exquisite desserts, and from time to time waiters in suspenders passed in between, carrying trays laden with various beverages. Many handsome men and beautiful women, dressed in formal attire and wearing masks, were seated in small groups at the tables, engaging in lively and cheerful conversations. No one was dressed provocatively. Everyone's attire was tidy, and unlike what he imagined, there were no raucous sounds of partying or any risque jokes upon entering. Everything looked nothing like a silver party but rather like a gathering for upper-class socialites. Chapter 79. Isn't this too presumptuous of you? The Tuberculosis Rabbit felt slightly awkward as he tightened his belt once more and hastily looked down at the event ticket in his hand. That's right. He hadn't gone to the wrong place. But the scene in front of him wasn't just a bit different from what he had imagined, it was a completely different world. Just then, a waiter strode toward them, his face unseen, but his voice was soft and gentle. Welcome both of you to Hall 188 of the Silver Party. There are 10 minutes left before the official start. Please find a suitable table and take a seat. Shortly, a host will guide everyone to begin the activities. Oh! Tuberculosis Rabbit was a bit shocked and paused. There was a host, so professional. You could tell it was high class. True to a game's hosting, it had fully transcended lowbrow tastes, focusing on elegance. And that was just perfect for him, as he was naturally allergic to vulgarity and had a fondness for refinement. Soon after they had taken their seats, the lights in the hall dimmed. The band on stage also gradually ceased playing, and the entire venue fell silent. Suddenly, spotlights from the ceiling shone onto a man in a red suit who had appeared on the stage at some point. The man, holding a cane in one hand and gesturing with his other arm toward the crowd beneath, spoke in a voice as soothing as a spring breeze. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am the host of the Silver Party event in Hall 188, and I will lead you to experience what true paradise is. Please follow my rhythm, and I promise you an experience like no other. Now, sitting at the round table, Tuberculosis Rabbit looked sentimentally toward the host on stage while continuously stuffing the free desserts on the table into his mouth. It was all free. Eating more could mean earning back the ticket cost. Such a bargain. Was the Snow Sea Project team doing charity now? At that moment, he suddenly heard a familiar male voice next to his ear. Good evening, madam. Have you ever heard that beyond this world, there exist immortals? Do you believe in the existence of immortals in this world? Tuberculosis Rabbit was startled for a moment. He instinctively stuffed the last dessert into his mouth and turned to look at the next table. Though surrounded by darkness, he still recognized the middle-aged man trying to strike up a conversation. Damn, you're that sword without end who ran off after showing off. Didn't you leave? Why did you come here? Although he couldn't see through Sword Without End's mask, and because the lounge blocked all props, skills and even titles, he couldn't even see the title above Sword Without End's head. But that voice was too familiar. He had just heard it, how could he possibly forget? So you ran off so hastily just to make it to the Silver Party? Has the Hehuan sect started training sword immortals too? Sword Without End, who was trying to flirt, stiffened momentarily, then, without turning his head, abandoned his current target and strode into the darkness to find a new one. Tee-hee. The woman who had just been approached by sword without end covered her mouth and let out a silvery laugh, her eyes gleaming as she looked at Tuberculosis Rabbit. Brother, you certainly are a character. Although he couldn't see her face clearly, judging by her curvaceous figure and those watery, soul-hooking eyes, he guessed her looks wouldn't disappoint, and she was probably in her early 30s. A tight-fitting cheongsam accentuated her figure beautifully. Quite the picture of femininity. Gulp. Tuberculosis Rabbit unconsciously swallowed, his eyes struggling to move away from the woman in front of him. Are we starting now? Didn't the host say to wait? Damn it, I forgot to use a prop before coming in. Just then, the woman slowly stood up and walked to Tuberculosis Rabbit's side, her body limp as a boneless chicken foot, and she collapsed into Tai Chui's embrace with a dazed look, lightly dragging her finger across his chest. Such a sturdy body could really crush someone to death. Yes. Tuberculosis Rabbit nodded gravely, he could crush someone. Come here to me, I'm skinny. If you were really crushed to death, that wouldn't be a joyous occasion at all. Looking up with eyes brimming with seduction at Tai Chui, who appeared somewhat perplexed, and feeling his body suddenly tense and rigid, the woman couldn't help but chuckle softly, her fingers trailing across Tai Chui's slightly prickly stubble. Her voice growing increasingly hazy, she murmured. My body is soft, though. It can take the pressure. Meanwhile, it seemed as if the host on stage had signaled the start, and the lights throughout the venue suddenly went out. Lively music played in the darkness as many social butterflies began to dance to the beat. Tai Chui's anxious cries for help could be heard in the dark. Brother Tuberculosis Rabbit, help me. Help your mom. Tuberculosis Rabbit sat alone on a small sofa beside the round table, puffing on a cigarette he had lit with irritation, engulfed in smoke. The venue had thought of everything. There were cigarettes on the table, might as well smoke one more if possible. Since he hadn't successfully paired up before nightfall, he was left with no choice but to recoup his expenses with desserts and cigarettes. As Tuberculosis Rabbit was brooding by himself, a soft and tender white hand suddenly rested on his shoulder in the dark, and the damp breath close to his ear made a woman's voice softly ask. Aren't you the one from the garden district in Yanshanj? Tuberculosis Rabbit narrowed his eyes and said coldly, how do you know that? I definitely know. The woman's voice was as gentle as a fly buzzing. I wonder if next time, could you also bring that man with many titles above his head? I really want him. The next second, Tuberculosis Rabbit's breathing suddenly became slightly obstructed, a look of shock flashed across his eyes, and he couldn't help but exclaim, no way, isn't that too damn presumptuous? Damn it! Are you out of your mind? Can't you be a bit more normal? What kind of people are you all? But immediately after, he was at a loss for words because the woman had somehow managed to curl up into his arms, burrowing into his short sleeves and nestling her head into his chest. Silently and without expression, Tuberculosis Rabbit paused for a moment before bringing a cigarette to his lips for a fierce drag, then pinched the cigarette butt between his fingers and flicked it aside. Looks like I have to learn to adapt to this presumptuous world. Time ticked away until it reached 5 a.m. The number of people killing monsters on the outskirts of the city hadn't decreased, in fact, they were only increasing. Chen Yi sat on the throne in silence, saying nothing. With the 100 soldiers he had summoned to kill Minotaur monsters for him, he didn't need to lift a finger, even if the Minotaur monster's profit was pretty low. Defeating a Minotaur monster yielded only 2 to 4 points. A single soldier could barely defeat a Minotaur monster, it was often a fight to mutual destruction, and the Minotaur monster's one stone axe coming crashing down was pretty lethal. At least his heavy armored soldiers couldn't quite handle it. It took at least 2 heavy armored soldiers to gang up on a Minotaur monster to succeed. Although the profit was a bit low, he didn't have much else to do. A mosquito may be small, but it's still meat. Moreover, occasionally a small prop would drop, which was better than nothing. If only he had a chef with him right now. He could be eating some hot midnight snacks. Although food could be bought from the store, it was all basic dry rations, definitely filling, but one shouldn't expect too much in terms of taste. As for the live theater map that awarded the unique global character action, he didn't plan to go right now, waiting instead until the Child's Day event was over. At 8 a.m., the Child's Day event would officially begin. Now that it was already 5 a.m., it was almost upon them. At this moment, Ji was sitting on the edge of the throne, legs dangling in the air, her little head bobbing like a tumbler, clearly on the verge of dozing off. Chen Yi leaned back in his chair, without a sense of tiredness, as he had only recently awoken. Just as he was about to organize the props in his backpack, a sudden double flash of white light appeared before him. When the white light faded, Tuberculosis Rabbit and Tai Chui were suddenly standing there. Oh! Chen Yi raised an eyebrow and leaned back in his chair, smiling. How was it? Did you have fun? Whether it was fun or not is another question. Tuberculosis Rabbit wiped the cold sweat from his forehead with a somewhat wistful click of his tongue, but brother Tai Chui here is genuinely sincere, a keeper. At the end of the venue, brother Tai Chui was hugging a woman and wouldn't let go for the life of him. He insisted on bringing this woman back for you, Yi, to have a taste. In the end, a bolt of lightning split from the ceiling of the venue, and only then did Tai Chui let go and fainted. He's just woken up now, probably still a bit confused. Chen Yi looked toward Tai Chui, who was still a bit dazed, jumped down from the throne, and handed him a cigarette, patting his arm and grinning. Thanks for the thought, brother. You've had a tough trip, brother. Go rest up a bit. The Child's Day event is about to start. I should head back and get some more rest myself. Meanwhile, Ji, who was slowly waking up at the side, with sleepy eyes, stretched out her hand to pull Tai Chui over, then sat on his shoulder and looked up at Chen Yi. Well, Yi, we'll be heading back first then. We'll come find you when the event starts. Sure, go ahead. Chen Yi stood there with his staff, watching Ji and the others leave with a calm expression. Perhaps because they both wore stroppy dresses, they didn't fly but started walking instead. Of course, Tai Chui's walking speed wasn't slow either, he moved at a brisk pace. After watching the two leave, Chen Yi placed one hand behind his back, covertly rubbing his butt and muttering a complaint. Next time I'll make sure to get a softer cushion, this frozen throne really stiffens one's butt. Let's go, still can get 3 to 4 hours of rest back home. I still don't know what this Child's Day event is going to be. Afterward, without saying more, he activated his sleigh and, with Tuberculosis Rabbit in tow, shot towards Yanchenj, heading straight for the garden district. Li Yide watched the scene of Chen Yi leaving with one hand behind his back, a satisfied nod on his face. Sure enough, those who like to keep their hand behind their back are all a bit itchy in the butt. Lucky for me, mine's just fine. He shook his own foxtail with a slight sense of smug satisfaction. In the garden district, a certain building. Where did you go just now? A man's voice, slightly anxious and hurried, rose. I've been looking for you for a long time. The woman, a bit flustered but trying to sound calm, explained in a low voice, I went for a night run, you see, trying to improve my fitness to face emergencies, right? Feel here, my neck is still sweaty. It's tiring, okay. Chapter 80. Children's Day Special Limited Time Event officially begins. Ding-ling-ling, ding-ling-ling. The grating sound of an alarm clock abruptly rang out in a room in the garden district. It was 7:30 in the morning. Is it time already? Tuberculosis Rabbit rubbed his bleary eyes, stretched languidly, and after a yawn of epic proportions, he got up and ran to the bathroom to wash up. While washing up, he looked towards the breakfast on the table and asked somewhat curiously. Yi, did you make this food? Wasn't it said that the June rule doesn't take effect on the 1st? Why are we suddenly eating this morning? Chen Yi stood by the window looking outside without turning around and replied softly, we still don't know whether the eating mentioned in the June rule refers to fast food products, or if it specifically requires cooked food straight from the pot. We haven't found a cook yet. So, I made some breakfast myself first, in case fast food products don't fulfill the task of the rule tomorrow, we'll be better prepared. And to get used to the food I make ahead of time. Tuberculosis Rabbit's body suddenly stiffened, he took a long time to finish washing up with slow, hesitant movements and then reluctantly approached the table, looking at the 2 steaming bowls of egg noodles without a word. He didn't have the courage to pick up the chopsticks for a while. After a long silence, he finally looked up at Yi's back. Yi, why is the noodle black? I added soy sauce. You added a bit too much, didn't you? I did add a bit too much. Yi, do you know the difference between soy sauce and dark soy? I don't, do you? I don't either. Then let's eat. After a prolonged silence, Tuberculosis Rabbit finally mustered enough courage and sat down on the stool, cautiously chewing on the noodles that had turned too dark to be properly seen. He chewed carefully. After a few bites, Tuberculosis Rabbit expressed his mild surprise. It's actually not bad, eh? It's got more bite than last time, and I can finally tell it's actually noodles. Really? Chen Yi, standing by the window with his back to Tuberculosis Rabbit, spoke with a faint trace of pride in his voice. I looked up some strategies. I rinsed the noodles with cold water before taking them out of the pot, that's why they're chewier. It is much better than last time, but Yi, why is it so sour? The strategy said that if you add too much soy sauce, you should add some vinegar. So, after I added too much soy sauce, I put in some vinegar, then realized the vinegar was too much. And then I looked up more strategies, which said if there's too much vinegar, add more soy sauce. Alright, Yi, you don't need to say any more, I can imagine what it was like when you were cooking. Tuberculosis Rabbit's eyelids twitched a few times as he set his chopsticks rest on the bowl. He could already picture Yi holding a soy sauce bottle in his left hand and a vinegar bottle in his right, standing by the pot continuously seasoning the dish. To his knowledge, this type of behavior often occurs with witches concocting potions in the antagonists of fairy tales. He couldn't stomach the food anymore. But not to dishearten Yi, he took a deep breath, pulled out a spicy carrot from his chest pocket, and started chewing vigorously. Then he held the bowl to his lips, closed his eyes, and shoveled the noodles into his mouth with his chopsticks. 15 minutes later, Chen Yi, dressed neatly, was standing at his front door ready to head out when he hesitated and looked towards Tuberculosis Rabbit, who wore a somewhat sickly expression. There's no perfect person in this world, everyone has their flaws. You can understand that, right? I get it, Yi, you don't need to explain, we're brothers. Tuberculosis Rabbit forced a smile, with only one thought in mind: this stuff couldn't possibly be toxic, right? Let's go, we'll meet up with Ji and the others. It's time to get ready for the Children's Day event. With less than 20 minutes left until the Children's Day event. As they were walking out of the building heading towards the rooftop, they suddenly heard voices in the fire escape, sounding like a couple coming downstairs. You could faintly hear their conversation. Who knows how long the natural gas will last? What will we do about cooking if it gets cut off? What's there to be afraid of? If it gets cut off, it won't just be us affected. With so many people cut off, how will others cook? How will we cook? Same deal. That's true. As the voices grew clearer, they saw the couple at the corner of the fire escape, looking like a young husband and wife. The man wore a smart shirt and vest and carried black-rimmed glasses, looking like a cultured individual. The woman was in a retro-styled long dress with sandals, tying up her ponytail while walking down the stairs, portraying an efficient air about her. The makeup was light, and her looks were ordinary. But there was a strong professional vibe about her, kind of like a teacher. Speaking of which, for some reason, the occupation of female teachers seems very recognizable. When you walk down the street and see a woman who feels like she might be a teacher, chances are, you can trust your gut because she's probably a primary school teacher. Perhaps it's childhood DNA kicking in, that familiar aura suddenly awakening a deep fear within. The young couple had been chatting as they came downstairs, but as soon as they saw Chen Yi and his companion at the bottom of the stairs, they froze, a flicker of panic passing through both their eyes. You guys go ahead. Chen Yi casually stepped aside to make way, his expression calm. He was completely accustomed to strangers reacting like this upon seeing him, especially with more than a dozen titles floating above his head that were indeed quite eye-catching. This was normal. Thank you, thank you. The man with black-framed glasses frantically grabbed the woman's hand and dashed downstairs, as if fearful that making this big shot wait would provoke his anger. And the woman, ever since seeing Chen Yi and his companion, had been keeping her head down, clutching her man's arm tightly, closely following him down. When she moved past Chen Yi and his companion, there was no eye contact, seemingly afraid of strangers. As the woman passed by the Tuberculosis Rabbit, it suddenly sniffed and said in mild surprise, "This shampoo smells so familiar, isn't it Sassoon?" The woman, almost at the corner, stiffened, still holding tightly to her man's arm, not looking back. "We have similar tastes, I also like Sassoon. It smells really nice, doesn't it?" The woman responded perfunctorily and then quickly headed downstairs, still clinging to her man's arm. Chen Yi and his companion didn't linger. They went straight to the rooftop and activated the sleigh, setting a bowl of egg noodles in front of the reindeer. He made 2 bowls of noodles. One for the Tuberculosis Rabbit to eat, and the other was placed here. The reindeer, just pulled out of sleep, was still half awake with its eyes barely open, but its nose twitched as if it had caught a scent. Then, its eyes snapped open, glistening with eagerness as it looked at the bowl of egg noodles and started gobbling it down. With hands in his pockets, the tuberculosis rabbit stood by with a somewhat emotional expression and said, "Times are tough for everyone. Look at Santa Claus, who knows how he's been mistreating this poor reindeer. And yet, it's enjoying the meal so much. Sticking with us, it gets to enjoy some good times for a while." Soon after finishing its meal, Chen Yi carried the tuberculosis rabbit and flew straight to the coordinates sent by Ge. They had barely exchanged a few words when 8 o'clock arrived. A notification sounded in the ears of all players. Game event announcement. June 1 to June 3. Children's Day special limited time event officially begins. All players can participate in this event over these 3 days. Event 1, Children's Paradise. All children under the age of 18 will be transported to a huge children's paradise filled with chocolate, arcade games, many playmates, talking dolls, and a lot of fun equipment. Children under the age of 18 will spend 3 days in this huge paradise, unconditionally enjoying themselves and hopefully creating wonderful childhood memories. Event 2, Limited Time Store. Players can purchase various rare and typically hard to obtain props in the limited time store over these 3 days using points. Event 3, Rose Guardian. Male players can buy roses with points and gift them to a female player to obtain corresponding guardian points, which can be exchanged for exclusive props in a special store. Female players can use points to buy a dedicated small speaker to canvas for themselves, thereby increasing the number of roses received and earning corresponding charm points based on the quantity, which can also be used to trade for exclusive props in the special store. There will also be 2 exclusive global ranking lists for limited time events. Gentleman's Guardian List and Ladies' Charm List. The top 10 on the Guardian and Charm lists will receive different exclusive limited time titles, a global announcement broadcast, and an event-exclusive unique character action. Event 4, Spells Come True. During the event, every player will possess the ability where anything they say might come true. Based on the difficulty of the wish, the chances of it coming true range from 1 in 10 million to 1 in 1,000. Event 5, Rambunctious Little Monsters. During the event, many giant brats carrying gift packs will randomly appear in corners around the world. Defeating them will allow players to share in the lavish rewards. Voices resonated deep within the hearts of all players. Neither the deaf nor the blind need to worry about missing out on the event announcement. The 5 events comprised the entirety of the Children's Day event. Just as the announcement ended, the once quiet Yancheng suburbs, attentively listening to the event details, suddenly exploded with a cacophony of urgent voices. My account has 1 million points. My account has 100 billion points. I'll freaking punch the entire Snow Sea project team to death. What was once a peaceful monster brushing square suddenly became a wishing district. Perhaps, never before had so many wishes been made in unison at a single moment globally. This could be a moment worthy of the history books. If heaven has a server and it suddenly received such a frequent, intense influx of wishes, it just might think it was under a DOS attack from Satan. Chapter 81. Then I wish for your wish to fail. A 1 in 10 million chance sounds very low, almost unattainable. But that probability is based on the premise that every word you speak has a 1 in 10 million chance of coming true. Which means, if you start off making 10,000 wishes a day, in a way, you can greatly increase that probability. The monster brushing square, originally silent and abiding by the rules, was now like a concert scene, filled with countless noisy and excited voices all converging in the hope that the god of fortune would descend upon them. The April Rule Active Expert required every player to converse 1,000 sentences with others every day. Although many people had accomplished this rule back then, they lived in anxiety every day, like having the sword of Damocles over their heads, dreading any accident might occur and render them mute. And now, the June event kids say the darndest things. It didn't force anyone. Yet, it made all players throw all caution to the wind, their faces excited and their eyes brimming with hope as they fervently and rapidly made wishes, words flying out at breakneck speed. Before even closing their mouths from the last sentence, the next one would already be out. Let my mom return to normal, let my mom return to normal. A young man in a tracksuit, kneeling on the ground, looked up solemnly and devoutly to the sky and muttered rapidly. Let my mom return to normal. Please cure her illness and muteness. When the April Rule came, his mother had just completed full anesthesia to prepare for surgery. The surgery was hastily completed due to various accidents. But because of violating the April rule, she had become mute and to this day could not speak. Let 1,000,000 players buy a bouquet of roses for me later. A woman standing in the crowd, her hands clasped in front of her chest, kept whispering softly. Her thought was simple. Instead of something intangible, she wanted something simple. If 1,000,000 players each sent her a rose, she would surely top the charm list. She would then receive a large number of rewards. After all, the simpler the wish, the greater the probability of success. At least she believed that it was much simpler to get 1,000,000 players to send her a bouquet of roses than to magically have 1,000,000 points show up in her account. Let 10 points appear in my account. Let 10 points appear in my account. Hearing the clear wishes nearby, Tuberculosis Rabbit looked surprised as he glanced towards the source and watched a young wisher with interest, unable to help but crack a smile. You're not too greedy, hey? You came out with a wish for just 10 points. Cough, better safe than sorry, 10 points seems more realistic. Interesting, then I'll make a wish for your wish to fail. The young man stared blankly at Tuberculosis Rabbit and fell silent for a moment, after looking at the title above Tuberculosis Rabbit's head and the dozen titles above the man next to him. He didn't speak. He just silently walked away. Seconds later, a faint curse could be heard amidst the surrounding noise. What a fucking idiot! Tuberculosis Rabbit wasn't upset, he shook his head with a sense of unfinished business and looked around. He loved chatting with people and hadn't been in such a lively environment for a long time. Just as Chen Yi was about to get up and head to a quiet place, he suddenly heard a wish coming from behind him. I hope my brother's cerebral palsy can be cured. Chen Yi's steps faltered slightly as he turned to look at Ji standing behind him with her head bowed, hands clasped and barefoot on the ground. His eyes narrowed slightly but he said nothing. He just watched as Tai Chui stood beside her, grinning foolishly, making Ji look particularly tiny by comparison, like the arrival of a thunder god. He couldn't help but shake his head and smile helplessly, reached into his pocket to pull out a cigarette and offered it to Tai Chui, saying, "Everyone's making wishes, don't you want to make one too? Although it's a long shot, this is genuinely an opportunity that might happen. Don't you have any wishes of your own?" Tai Chui's eyes lit up with joy as he carefully accepted the cigarette, smoothing it before tucking it away inside his jacket's inner pocket. What's a wish? It's something you really want in your heart but find hard to achieve. Ah! I want my sister to have lots of clothes to wear, is that possible? Of course, it is. Chen Yi was slightly stunned for a moment, but then said nothing, merely patted Tai Chui on the arm, signaling that it was time to follow him and leave this place, to find somewhere quiet. No wonder that in the Sands of Time map, Tai Chui had thought of using points to buy a fashion treasure box for Ji. Turns out, this thing had become Tai Chui's dream. This brother and sister pair were quite interesting. He wondered what the trajectory of their lives would be if the future had not unfolded this way. After leaving the noisy monster brushing square via a sled, Chen Yi stopped on the rooftop of a tall building. He first looked towards the second item of the Children's Day event. Event 2, Exclusive Store. According to the event description, this exclusive store contains many rare and hard to acquire props which can be purchased with points. And what he has in abundance is points. His current points balance is a little over 220,000, not reaching 230,000. He's not sure how much points everyone around the world has, but he feels that the quantity he possesses is definitely not small. He should at least be ranked within the top 100,000, right? As for those unknown forces that started using various methods to hoard large quantities of points from the moment they were introduced, who knows how many points they have amassed? He didn't give it much thought but instead looked towards the exclusive store in front of him, ready to search for some rare and powerful props. It must be said that the exclusive store indeed has quite a few rare props. Many props were not only unseen by him before but he hadn't even heard of them, having no idea such things existed. For example, prop name, rule exemption coupon. Prop grade, C grade. Prop effect, upon use, grants exemption from any rule within the current month for the next 24 hours. Prop description, the purpose of a rule's existence is to let privileges go unhindered. Prop price, 200 points. Prop limitation, 19238/1 million. This prop. Chen Yi's eyes lit up slightly. This is definitely a good thing. The June rule isn't very threatening. Even if one violated all the rules, at most they would get a new title. And who knows, some people might even like it. After all, even though always in a state of fatigue and hunger, they would no longer need to sleep or eat. In some sense, for some people, it's not really a punishment. There are many who haven't slept for years and some haven't eaten a single grain of rice for years. How these people survive is a mystery, the world never lacks such aliens. He could almost completely immunize himself against the May rule as well. But no one knows what the rules for the coming July to September will be. Hoarding a bit of this kind of thing is a precaution. Most importantly, it's not expensive. It's just 200 points. That's equivalent to twice the price of a silver party ticket. And it could be a life-saving item at a critical moment. There's a global limit of 1 million, and nearly 20,000 were already bought shortly after the event started. Buy. His shopping principle has always been not to buy expensive items or cheap ones, but to buy the limited ones. This was why he bought a large stack of star upgrading coupons during his first extraterrestrial invader event in the points store because they were limited purchases. These items were still quietly resting in one of his inventory slots. Currently unusable and their purpose unknown, but he thought it was better to buy first and ask questions later. Unfortunately, the quantity of these rule exemption coupons up for sale was quite large, and he didn't have the means to buy them all, which somewhat unsettled him as he usually liked to buy out all of a limited item. Let's start with 100. With the deduction notification, 20,000 points vanished just like that. His account balance dropped to over 200,000 points, and his inventory gained a stack of rule exemption coupons. He didn't put these items in his backpack, instead, he gave them all to Tuberculosis Rabbit. 100 should be nearly enough, and there are many more good items later. He cannot spend all the points he has saved for so long here. That's fantastic. Tuberculosis Rabbit, looking serious, neatly placed these 100 rule exemption coupons into a slot of his backpack. He gazed at the number 100 at the top left corner of the coupons and couldn't help but express his contentment comfortably. I don't know why, but just seeing so many items neatly placed in the inventory brings such a pleasant feeling. If it wasn't the wrong time, I could stare at them for 10 minutes. Back when he used to play games with Yi. As soon as Yi would log in, he'd go brush dungeons, whereas he'd open his own inventory, lean back on the couch, and light a cigarette between his fingers. With a satisfied and pleasurable expression, he would admire his inventory through the swirling blue smoke. And occasionally, he would click on a prop to read its detailed information for a while. He could do this for an entire afternoon. The more useless the items, the more he liked them. Chen Yi didn't linger and continued to quickly browse further down because otherwise, there was a risk that any limited prop could be sold out completely, and it would be his turn to feel distressed. Soon, he discovered another prop that interested him. Prop name, Vehicle Renaming Coupon. Prop grade, E grade. Prop effect, allows one to change the name of their vehicle to a preferred name within 306 characters. Prop description, we always advocate for players to develop their unique sense of aesthetics. Prop price, 100 points. Prop limitation, 22/100,000. With a limit of 100,000 and after about 15 minutes since the event start, only 22 have been sold. However, not many are willing to spend points to rename a vehicle at this time. It's no different from throwing points into the water. You can't even hear a splash. But even so, 22 people have purchased this prop, and the 23rd willing buyer has appeared. Chapter 82. Gunshots ring out, Divine Soul Annihilation. Buy. Chen Yi once again waved his hand grandly and bought 20 vehicle renaming coupons to toss into Tuberculosis Rabbit's backpack. He would rename that vehicle of his when he got back to it. What mechanical moose Christmas sleigh, it sounds awful and it's a mouthful, plus that mechanical moose is utterly useless, it would just dangle there as a sleigh ornament. A mechanical moose that can't even handle speeds over 1000 km per hour, what a piece of junk. It's not even as good as his 5-spice melodier. A bowl of noodles a day keeps your energy at bay. Even if he had to name it, it would be 5-spice melodier Christmas sleigh. Or it could be Santa Claus, that old man has been chasing me for a whole day, I remember this grudge. Wait till I level up in December, I'll capture all your 2000 plus deer to pull my sleigh, and make you deliver gifts on Christmas Day by climbing down chimneys on foot. Or it could be all the vehicles ranked below me on the leaderboard, what kind of trash are they? Oranges flavored exploding beads, traceless green peak, and all sorts of messy vehicles, can you even compete? Could you please just blow up the top rank for me? After all, the limit for renaming a vehicle is 306 characters, not to mention changing a name, even writing a short essay of over 100 words would be enough. What exactly he would rename it to, he still had to give it some thought. One thing for sure was that he was definitely changing the name. He had been enduring it for too long already. As for why he bought 20. Renaming things can be addictive after doing it once you start thinking about the second, third time. If not for the lack of points, he would have bought at least 50. Not lingering any longer, he continued to look down the list. Prop name, area horn. Prop level, C grade. Prop effect, allows one's voice to be heard by all players in a main city and its nearby regions, and will appear in front of players as a banner light screen. Prop restrictions, can only be used in the main city, which is defined as the city where the main city mission has been completed. Prop price, 1000 points. Prop limited sale, none. This. Chen Yi hesitated slightly, finding himself somewhat indecisive. Actually, this prop was quite attractive to him, he had already thought about how he would use it. When Yanqing once again faced a beast tide, he would activate the horn. Say something like a 4-character idiom that's filled with vigor, cultural level, and also loaded with profound meaning. Anyway, the point was to have a sonorous voice resounding in the ears of all players in Yanqing, and then he would ascend above Yanqing in the sleigh. Then pull off a unique global character action. Make a dazzling entrance. That display would simply max out his presence. His philosophy was that even if his combat power was lacking, his style must be full-blown. The problem is, the price is a bit steep. 1000 points for a horn, isn't that a bit extravagant? After pondering for a moment, he nodded and decided that he should focus on increasing his fighting power, for only with sufficient combat capability could he survive in this chaotic world. All these showy things are just temporary solutions, not long-term plans. So, he chose to buy only 3,000 points to show off was a price he could accept. At worst, he would make himself grind for 10 hours outside the city later. Grinding was really hard for him. Even though he didn't have to lift a finger, his butt would truly get stiff. After adding these 3 horns into his backpack, he looked again at the other props. His gaze was suddenly drawn by a prop, and his eyes immediately shot out a burst of bright light. Prop name, Septagon badge. Prop level, B grade. Prop effect, this prop is an accessory for firearms, with specific effects as follows. 1. When the Septagon badge is embedded in a firearm, every bullet will carry the black shine special effect, leaving behind a black luster as the main tail flame effect in the air. 2. Every shot fired towards an enemy will invariably hit the heart chamber. 3. Whenever the Septagon badge hears discussions about its owner from those around, it will start to vibrate slightly, constantly drawing power, and once charged, it can activate its special effect. Special effects. After activating the special effect, the Septagon badge will create 100 gun barrels according to the main prop of the firearm it is embedded in, launching a 10-second annihilating assault on the enemy in front. Each gun barrel can normally fire bullets. If there is only one enemy, all 100 gun barrels will target that enemy. If there are multiple enemies, the 100 gun barrels will spread and randomly target the enemies. Prop restrictions. 1. When the Septagon badge has heard a total of 10,000 remarks concerning debates about its owner, it is fully charged and can activate the special effect at any time. 2. If the firearm in which it is embedded consumes points for each bullet fired, then upon activating the special effect, the points consumed will increase by 100-fold. 3. This prop can be freely removed and attached to other firearms. Prop introduction. If someone has to stand up, then I hope that person is you. Prop price, 150,000 points. Prop limited sale, 0/1. Only one for sale. So far, not a single person has made a purchase. And next to the prop panel, there was a usage effect video. In the video, a middle-aged man clad in black, with a stern and icy face, pulled out a revolver commonly used by cowboys from his bosom and aimed at a giant minotaur monster not far away, activating the special effects. The next second, in the air, suddenly emerged a total of 100 gun barrels, all pointing directly at that minotaur monster. A full 100 bullets with black glittering special effects burst forth towards the minotaur monster. The special effects looked exceptionally beautiful and dazzling. There was no sensation of lightness, but instead a profound sense of deterrence and shock. The 100 bullets, like shooting stars, passed straight through the heart of the minotaur monster, shattering its flesh into the sky, which became the conclusion of the video. This was a firearm-enhancing prop. Taken alone, it wasn't much use, but combined with firearm-related props, it could have an effect that was unstoppable. After watching this promotional video, Chen Yi did not hesitate in the slightest to choose to purchase. His account balance decreased by another 150,000 points. This prop, in combination with his sniper rifle, would have an effect where 1 + 1 = 3, significantly amplifying his power. His sniper rifle, with every bullet, could inflict true damage worth 3% of the target's maximum health value. In other words, after activating the special effects, he could instantly cause true damage equal to 300% of the enemy's maximum health value. With this level of damage, to put it bluntly, would you dare Santa Claus to stroll by again? Isn't it just recovering 100% of the maximum health value every second? Then what if there are no countermeasures? One shot brings them down. It can be said that this item greatly improved both his single target attack strength and his AoE, area of effect, ability. Whether it's the neutral boss in December or the boss after 80 years. As long as they are not in an invincible state and have no defenses whatsoever. Bang! The sound of the gun meant divine soul annihilation. The game was all about crushing with overwhelming numbers. As for that special effects charge, that wasn't a challenge for him either. He just needed to show his face in front of everyone. With over a dozen titles above his head, that alone was enough to keep everyone talking for a while. And before long, the charge was complete. Just then, from the square not too far away, came bursts of exclamations. Chen Yi raised his eyebrows lightly and turned his head to look down at the plaza below. He saw a child-sized figure at least 6 meters tall who had appeared on the square, brandishing a bulging gift sack in his hands, continually swinging it and attacking the players around him. That huge gift sack, in the hands of the child-sized figure, was like a heavy hammer. Each impact on the ground left a deep pit. If someone were directly hit, they likely wouldn't have a chance of getting rescued. At this moment, quite a few players had already started to collectively use their abilities to besiege this child-sized boss, and over time, everyone had figured out that the bosses in these limited-time events weren't all that strong. As long as you concentrated hard and dodged the boss's attacks in time, there wouldn't be any problems. Moreover, the rewards would be distributed based on a ranking of damage dealt to the boss. And the method of distributing rewards was extremely fair. Even if you only had assist skills and were just dodging on the sidelines, giving some speed buff to a player engaged with the boss, you could still share in certain rewards after the boss died. Though you didn't cause any damage, you had contribution value. For example, someone who constantly held the boss's aggro would also receive additional rewards. In short, every player's effort was guaranteed to be rewarded appropriately. Let's go, let's check it out down there. Chen Yi boarded the snow sled, beckoned Tuberculosis Rabbit and others onto it, and then shot towards the ground below. Hurry, hurry, get ready. Near the child-sized boss, 3 bald men in newbie shorts, bare-chested, were running excitedly from a distance towards this place, their eyes filled with anticipation. The child-sized boss had arrived. Time to farm for rewards. When they were about 15 meters away from the boss, they stopped well before getting closer. At this distance, until the boss killed all the players in front of it, it was an absolutely safe spot where they wouldn't be attacked. Exceptionally safe. Of course, without ranged props or skills, it would be hard to deal damage to the boss. Big brother. One of the men, a young man with a slightly immature face and 3 tufts of mustache under his nose, could barely contain his excitement as he spoke, the usual rules. Nonsense. The leading man, who had only 1 tuft of mustache under his nose, pinched it to breathe more comfortably before scoffing. It's foolish to run up front and trade your life for rewards, while we can just use assist skills from afar to lightly take part in the assistance, with no threat to our lives and still get rewards. That's the path to long-term survival. Our ancestors told us long ago. Fortune comes with risks, but so does loss. The fruits of reckless bravery are not worth boasting about. Only a steady, sustainable approach is the path to true development. Chapter 83. Event Announcement. Player Chen Yi grandly gestures with a face full of boldness. Brother is brilliant. The man with 2 tufts of mustache below his nose, crouching in the corner, said with a serious expression as he cupped his fists in salute. Yi and I have relied entirely on brother's wise decisions all along. Of course, we'll listen to brother. And just then, the bratty bear boss not far away suddenly roared, as if enraged, twirling the gift sack in his hand like a massive hammer. He then violently smashed it towards a player who was shooting arrows a dozen meters away. The player's face changed instantly, and he turned and ran like mad. But obviously, the gift sack was coming at him faster, and it seemed about to crush the top of the player's head. Just as the gift sack's shadow had enveloped the player. It's our turn to enter the stage. Watching this scene unfold, the leading middle-aged man snickered, then turned to his two younger brothers behind him, exchanging glances before they stood shoulder to shoulder and pointed at the player frantically dodging the attack, shouting loudly, "Go!" As soon as they spoke, 3 jade-like beams of light shot out from their hands simultaneously, intertwining in mid-air to form a fist-sized jade orb, which, with an almost untraceable speed, surged into the body of the player. This was their skill. It was a support skill. Once this jade-like light entered a player's body, it would slightly increase their movement speed for 3 seconds. A buff skill. The cooldown was an hour, and it was an E-grade skill. But if the 3 brothers stood together, they would trigger the special effects of the skill, mind as one. Only when the triplet brothers possessed this skill simultaneously would this special effect emerge. If used on the same player at the same time, the 3 light orbs would merge into one, giving the target player a significant boost in movement speed for 10 seconds. And the cooldown would be reduced by 90%. It was indeed an exceptional support skill. The 3 brothers had obtained these skills by a fluke. During the 520 Valentine's Day event with Cupid in disarray, they used this support skill to rake in quite a few rewards. It was safe and rewarding. Could there be anything better? And that combined jade orb, under the expectant eyes of the 3 brothers, drilled straight into the body of the player who was sprinting for their life. Suddenly, the speed of the running player tripled. Like thunder tearing through clouds, he charged along the street directly towards his target. He was saved. Many players who were watching this scene breathed a sigh of relief for the sprinting player, who had received assistance. With such a high increase in movement speed, he would surely dodge that gift sack flying straight at him. However, the next second, people looked somewhat puzzled at the gift sack that had flown over the head of the darting player. The bear child boss seemed to have overexerted and missed. But then, everyone saw the sprinting player, like the first thunder of spring, shooting straight forward with his legs nearly smoking from the speed. Even his newbie underpants were nearly flung off. Finally, the sudden burst in movement speed allowed the player to catch the gift sack thrown by the boss at the very last moment. Bang! A loud collision resonated. People's jaws dropped in surprise, staring blankly at the quiet gift sack lying on the cracked street, momentarily stunned. By then, the player had been buried under the gift sack. After a moment of silence, someone finally muttered in bewilderment. Did the boss seem to have aimed poorly? It should have, if I saw correctly. If the player hadn't run, it seems he wouldn't have been hit at all. Even if he ran, it wouldn't have mattered. Without that sudden boost in movement speed, he couldn't have caught it. If the movement speed buff had been a bit stronger, that brother would have just run past, a little slower, and the gift sack would have landed right in front of him. But, right on the mark, not too fast, not too slow, just perfect. For a moment, many people looked toward the 3 bald men standing a few meters away from the gift sack with strange expressions, the same thought dawning on all of them. You did that on purpose, didn't you? Sitting on the sleigh and witnessing the scene below, Tuberculosis Rabbit couldn't help but be taken aback. Are they serious? Can these players really coordinate together to fight a boss? Chen Yi glanced at the gift sack and then turned his attention to the boss with only 7% health left. Although he could no longer claim the reward for the highest damage inflicted, the reward for the last hit wasn't bad either. 2 bullets were fired in succession. Bang! He successfully secured the last hit. So far, no one had managed to outdo his last hitting skills. Ding! Congratulations to player Chen Yi for successfully killing boss number 28,822, securing the last hit. Last hit reward, 99 roses. Damage reward, 121 points. 99 roses. Chen Yi looked at the prop that had suddenly appeared in his backpack, which also had a 3-day countdown on it, clearly indicating that after 3 days, the prop would expire. It belonged to the limited time consumable props. That's when he remembered the Rose Guardian event from the Children's Day activities, which he really had no interest in. Spend points to buy roses and then send them out. Did he think he had so many points in his pocket that it weighed him down? Did he have too much money with nowhere to spend it? But since they gave him 99 for free, it would be a waste not to use them, so he immediately followed the activity path guide and found the option to send flowers in the chat with Ji. There were several levels, 2. 1 rose. 9 rose bouquets. 99 rose baskets. 999 rose rain. 9999 rose sea. 99,999 rose planet. Chen Yi glanced at the different flower sending levels with some speechlessness. The highest level, Rose Planet, required a whopping 99,999 roses, which is a total of 100,000 points. Spending nearly 100,000 points to buy a Rose Planet to give away, has he gone mad? What was the point of having such an event appear? If anyone could send this thing, he'd stand on his head and wash his hair. Even if someone really collected a huge number of points in May, they wouldn't lose their senses and spend 100,000 points on something so utterly useless. If the Snow Sea project team can't plan an event, they shouldn't bother planning at all. What was the point of creating such an event that nobody would participate in? It was simply an insult to their intelligence. If it really came to it, let him be in charge of planning. At least when you plan an event, you should know what players want, evoking their desires. Chen Yi selected the 99 rose basket option without much enthusiasm. The next second, a cascade of roses suddenly appeared above Ji's head, as 99 dew-kissed roses fell from the sky and landed on her white camisole dress. The combination of red roses and the white camisole dress was nothing short of perfect. Enveloped in a waterfall of roses, Ji looked somewhat dazed as she lifted her right hand to touch the roses in the air, her earlobe tinged with a faint blush. She pursed her lips pretending as if nothing had happened and tried not to let her joy show too obviously. But her eyes, almost squinting into crescents, and the joy in her pupils betrayed Ji's thoughts completely. Eventually, Ji could no longer hold back the joy in her heart. She failed to manage her expression again as she involuntarily smiled, stopped pretending, and, with great openness, stood amidst the falling rose petals, spinning in place. With an expectant expression, her hands clutched behind her, she tiptoed and leaned forward, looking up at Chen Yi. "Does it look good?" "It looks good." Before Chen Yi could respond, Tai Chui clapped his hands with a simple-minded smile and said, "It really does look good." At this moment, Chen Yi had not noticed any of this, but his mouth slowly widened as he looked dazed and incredulous at the light screen panel in front of him. Seeing Chen Yi not paying attention to her, and with the rose rain now stopped, the roses that had fallen on the white dress turned into red dust and dissipated in the air, Ji slightly lowered her head with a bit of disappointment and turned to look down without speaking. The toes that had been pointed also drew back into their normal position. She pursed her lips, and her pale and tender hands unconsciously fiddled with her dress. The air was quiet for a moment. Tuberculosis Rabbit lightly coughed with one hand in a fist to ease the awkwardness and then nudged Yi with his elbow as if to say, "Come on, man, show some romance." Even Tai Chui, who had the brain of a patient with cerebral palsy, managed to blurt out, "You're as beautiful as the moonlight last night." How could Yi be even less impressive than Tai Chui? When was he not able to look at the panel? Why didn't he just look at it some other time? Tuberculosis Rabbit felt a bit embarrassed for Ji, but obviously, he couldn't say it looked good, that wasn't his line to pick up. Though he was a chatterbox who liked to talk, he still knew when he could contribute to the conversation and when he couldn't. However, even after Tuberculosis Rabbit nudged Yi with his elbow, Yi still did not react, staring blankly at the panel in front of him as if he was seeing something fascinating. Tuberculosis Rabbit couldn't help but sigh in disbelief, looking at Ji who had completely turned away. He nudged Yi a bit harder with his elbow. But Yi still did not respond. Just as Tuberculosis Rabbit was about to increase his effort once again. "Hey!" Chen Yi suddenly shouted loudly, his eyes shining as he looked up at Ji's figure from behind with pupils filled with intense excitement and eagerness, and his face nearly spilling with impatience. "What the?" Tuberculosis Rabbit was startled by the roar, looking confusedly at Yi who seemed not quite right, and asked blankly, "Yi, what's wrong with you?" But then, the next second, above Ji's head suddenly appeared a rose sea spanning hundreds of meters in diameter. Immediately after that, world announcements kept scrolling as banners across the screens of all players. Event announcement: player Chen Yi has flamboyantly and lovingly sent a 9,999 rose sea to Miss Ji. Let us send our sincere wishes to them. The same world announcement scrolled across the screens of all players in banner form, not once but 3 times. Chapter 84. A sky full of blossoms, all for her. 3 consecutive global announcements swept past all players in the form of banners, slowly flashing before their eyes. The banners were even wrapped with roses around the edges. It's important to know that global announcements are rarely made for a single player. Up until now, there has been only one player for whom a global announcement has been made, and that is Chen Yi, the only one. That time was when Chen Yi helped Yanqing become the first city to solve the insect calamity during the extraterrestrial invader event, which led to Yanqing being featured in a global announcement. As he killed the most enemies in Yanqing, he also made it onto the global announcement and was awarded the title Invincible under the Heavens. Aside from that time, there has never been another global announcement made for a particular player. There was only once because of a vehicle, which led to the vehicle patch update that Chen Yi obtained, which also triggered a global announcement, but it did not mention a name, it simply referred to him as a certain player. In strict terms. So far, global announcements have been made for an individual player only twice, once calling out his name, and once triggered by him but without mentioning his name. And now, it was the second, third, and fourth times that global announcements were officially made for a certain player. Multiple global announcements sounded in succession. At this moment, all players around the world took note that Chen Yi sent 3 gifts of 9,999 roses to a woman named Ji, worth a total of 30,000 points. To spend 30k points just to express one's love, how foolish. I misspoke, how extravagant. Meanwhile, above Yanqing, hovering above Ji, a rosy made up of flowers, hundreds of meters in diameter, slowly spun for a while before gently falling towards the ground. Suddenly, the entire square, every player witnessed a sea of roses made up of flowers. A sea of roses worth 30k points. Tens of thousands of roses floated down from the sky, and all the players stood there, their expressions one of awe, looking up at this once-in-a-century sight. At this moment, even the most stoic of men could feel the presence of romance wafting through the air. Even numerous couples among the players had reddened eyes, holding each other tightly, embracing and kissing with closed eyes. These times have been so hard on everyone. Such a romantic scene could easily tug at the softest strings of people's hearts. How romantic, sighed Li Yide, looking up at the rosy above with a dazed expression, his foxtail instinctively perking up. Through the gaps in the rosy, he seemed to see his first love. It was as if he once had a girl he really liked, only for her to walk away in the end. Since then, it seemed as if he started liking every girl in the world. If she were still here, could he also send out a sea of roses now? Forget it, not a sea of roses. That's too extravagant, but a 999 rose rain might be manageable. Han Yu silently clenched the dagger in her hand, looking up at the sled in the sea of flowers above, biting her lip without speaking. Stop looking, said a charming matron standing behind Han Yu, holding her into her embrace and leaning on her husband's head, whispering with a face full of happiness. Actually, compared to witnessing someone else's rosy, I prefer the 2 bundles of roses you and our son sent me. Little Yu is very strong now too, although he's not on par with that Chen Yi, but he's much stronger than the average player, and we will have our own little happiness in the future. You sure are content with what we have, the man said somewhat helplessly, holding his wife as he looked up at Chen Yi, who stood on the sled amidst the rosy, and couldn't help but sigh, this kid sure knows romance, but isn't the cost a bit too high? 30,000 points, wouldn't it be better to use them for something else? There's even a Rose Guardian event on Children's Day, so a Chrysanthemum Ancestor Worship event on Tomb Sweeping Day seems normal too, right? Could it be that when the time comes, he'll also have to send a giant wreath of 9,999 chrysanthemums to honor his ancestors? Do you like it, wife? Said a middle-aged man straddling a bright brand pedal bicycle in a corner of the square, resting his foot on the ground and murmuring as he looked up at the rosy in the sky. It's beautiful, said the bald woman behind the middle-aged man, wrapped in a bedsheet and sitting on the back seat of the bicycle, her arms tightly embracing the man's waist, as if afraid he would disappear. Resting her head on the man's back and looking sidelong at the rosy, she spoke in a faint voice, if only we could see this every day. The man said nothing, just gritted his teeth, his eyes full of sorrow. The title Lucky Child of the God of Love floating above Chen Yi's head belonged to him, he had exchanged it for a bicycle from Chen Yi. He traded it to Chen Yi at the time because he thought such a character wouldn't die easily and wouldn't let his wife lose her life. Now Chen Yi is indeed still alive, but his wife will not make it that long. In the past few days, he rode his bicycle with his wife to many places in Yanqing, visiting all the attractions they never had time to visit before because of busy work schedules. He hated his own powerlessness. Before the calamity, he had no capabilities, and after the calamity descended, he still lacked any power. Several times, even the bicycle was nearly stolen from them. Such is the variety of life. Just like the joys and sorrows of humans do not resonate with each other. Right when all the players were looking up in awe, admiring the sea of flowers, the bald trio, panting heavily, worked together to move the gift bag heavy as a small mountain to the side, their eyes flickering with excitement and guilt as they looked at the barely breathing player underneath. The middle-aged man with a tuft of a mustache didn't say a word as he hoisted the player onto his back and ran quickly towards another player not far off that had healing skills, shouting urgently as he went. "Someone needs saving. Save him. Stop freaking looking." The sea of roses covered a vast area. It enveloped the entire square, allowing the players around, though not receiving the flowers themselves, to also enjoy the sensation of being amidst the floral expanse. "It's so beautiful." Ji stood there with a dazzled look, fiddling with her skirt, suddenly too shy to meet Chen Yi's gaze. She could only sneak peeks at the flower-filled sky evasively. She was just a little fishmonger. Only after packing up her stall could she carefully change into a new dress and go for a walk with her brother. That was the most romantic thing she had ever experienced. As for receiving flowers, she had only seen that in movies, never imagining that one day it could happen right before her eyes. With her ears turning a slight red, she tried her best to look natural, yet she could still faintly hear her own quickening heartbeat. She had never thought that she could enjoy such treatment in her life. A sea of flowers. All for her. Even the heroines in movies didn't get treated like this. Her heart dreamt up various scenarios, and the more she fantasized, the harder it throbbed. How could she accept a proposal? It's only been a handful of days since they met. "Yi, how can you be so frivolous?" "Heh." Tai Chui stood immobile on the sled like a sculpture, looking up at the rose sea above, scratching his head with a goofy smile as if lost in thought. "It's really nice." Tuberculosis Rabbit glanced at Yi, who had a smile on his face, and then at Ji, who stood in the corner of the sled with flushed ears, and couldn't help but nod in satisfaction, his smile revealing a touch of maternal pride unbidden. If Ji became his sister-in-law, he would be quite pleased. At least with Ji's temperament, she didn't seem like the type to drive a wedge between him and Yi. He was afraid Yi would find a domineering woman who wouldn't allow Yi to play with him or who would control Yi strictly, not letting him go out to meet with him. That would make him very angry. But if it were Ji, it wouldn't be an issue. Ji definitely wouldn't stop Yi from playing with him. Then, unable to restrain himself, he smiled with satisfaction again, turning to Yi and said, "What are you waiting for? First time confessing and don't know how to proceed? You've already given the flowers, hurry and confess. What are you waiting for? Ji won't make the first move, right?" As these words were spoken, Ji tensed slightly, turned her head to look the other way, and her earlobes visibly reddened a bit more, pretending not to hear the conversation. But it was all a bit too exaggerated. The sled wasn't that large. If she couldn't hear, then she might as well be diagnosed as deaf. "Yi." Seeing Chen Yi still smiling and motionless, watching Ji's retreating figure, and completely ignoring him, Tuberculosis Rabbit waved his hand in front of Chen Yi's eyes, perplexed. Seeing no reaction from Chen Yi still, he silently stood there, his eyes complex as he finally said softly, "Yi, please don't tell me that all this while you've been staring at the interface." At that moment, Chen Yi, looking satisfied, pulled out a blue card from his bosom and gave it a shake in front of Tuberculosis Rabbit. "Look what this is, I just exchanged for it. This is a real bargain. Give a bouquet of roses, and you get 1 Guardian Point. And Guardian Points can be exchanged in the Rose Guardian Events exclusive store for props. It seems not many people noticed this exclusive store in the Rose Guardian event. I just spent 30k points to get this prop, this time I made a huge profit. Oh right G, I just sent you 3 bouquets of 9,999 roses, you should have nearly 30k charm points, which can also be used in the exclusive store of Rose Guardian to purchase props. In the exclusive store of Rose Guardian, some props can only be exchanged with Guardian points, and some can only be exchanged with charm points. Take a look at what prop you want and exchange it yourself. Since we've known each other for so long, consider it a gift from me, whatever prop you exchange for, keep it for yourself." "Oh. Ji stiffened slightly, without turning around, she simply ran her fingers through her hair in the breeze, looking at the gradually fading rose sea in front of her, and stopped talking without looking at the store. She just stared at the rose petal that had fallen at the edge of the sled and was turning into dust. Like the curtain falling in a theater, everything was over. Nothing happened. Nothing at all. Even though, it had never even begun. Chapter 85. The boss is generous, the boss gives another one. Tuberculosis Rabbit silently pulled out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and put it to his lips, his arms resting on the edge of the sled, gazing into the horizon with a sense of helplessness. The situation was too awkward for words. He somewhat didn't want to turn back. He could already imagine the state of Ji's toes by now, probably beginning to curl and scrunch up in discomfort. He felt embarrassed on behalf of Ji. He took a heavy drag from his cigarette and couldn't help but speak up to remind, that Yi, are you sure it's really worth it? Do I even need to think about it? Chen Yi held up the blue card in his hand with a serious expression. This is a global exclusive character action, limited to the Rose Guardian event, and it's only 30,000 points. Think about it, global, exclusive, character action, event limited. Don't these terms put together justify 30k points? There's only one in the store, and it was I who snatched it up with quick reflexes. Plus, I've watched the preview video of the character action. It's really worth it. 30k points, and it's not worth it. How is this any different from snagging a great deal? After hesitating for a while, Tuberculosis Rabbit suddenly seemed tempted and spoke up, it does seem quite worth it, are there any more? I want to get one too. All those character actions in the personal panel shop are too common. No more. Chen Yi shook his head with a touch of regret, there was only this one character action limited for sale in the event shop. But there are many other great items in the event shop that need to be exchanged with Guardian points. Too bad one Guardian point is equivalent to 1 point. There are so many great items, but they're too expensive, we don't have enough points anymore. We only have 18,000 points left for now. However, I did see character actions for sale in the limited time shop, though they're not globally exclusive, they are still limited. But the prices aren't cheap either. The points are a bit tight. Chen Yi frowned, leaning on the edge of the sled and looking down, pondering where to quickly gather some points. After saving for so long, it felt like they were spent before they were even used. These points don't seem to last very long. After pondering for a while, he steered the sled toward the city center plaza and shot off. Wasn't there a main city mission activated, where I can pick up tasks in the plaza and earn high rewards? Let's see if there are any tasks with high rewards. To see so many desirable items right in front of him but not have the points to afford them was truly distressing. Husband. In front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of a certain office building, a voluptuous and scantily clad woman writhed like a serpent, cooing as she nestled in Gao Yiming's embrace. I want a sea of roses too. Won't you buy one for me, please? It's just 9,999 points, and for you, husband, that shouldn't be a problem at all, right? Slap. The moment the words were out, Gao Yiming struck her with a slap, and the crisp sound of it echoed on the spot. Fear flashed in the woman's eyes as she fell to the floor, but she dared not speak further. Quickly getting up, she adjusted her clothes and hurried out with her head down. Uncle Wei. After the woman left, Gao Yiming calmly pulled a handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his right hand. I think I've figured out a way. After all, Chen Yi is just an ordinary person, even if he stumbled upon power in the future world, that's all there is to it. How many points he has in total, to actually spend 30k points just for a smile from a fair lady? It's naive. I thought he just wanted Guardian points, but he didn't choose any of the dozen or so props that could enhance his strength from the event shop, instead exchanging for a character action that adds no strength at all. It's ridiculous. It seems he really is a man captivated by the allure of women, willing to lavish gold for a smile. How interesting. Send that woman just now to him. In terms of femininity, she is much stronger than that so-called Ji. Better yet, she could end up in Chen Yi's bed. Gao Yiming paused slightly, then squinted his eyes and suddenly smiled. Then, we can control Chen Yi by manipulating this woman. Right, tell the woman to act more innocent. Chen Yi seems to like that pure and innocent type. In the Rose Guardian exclusive shop, there was a global unique character action that required nearly 30k Guardian points to purchase. And just now, the prop was marked as sold out. Who else could have bought it but Chen Yi, the only one now with nearly 30k Guardian points? Most of the props in the Rose Guardian exclusive shop are flashy but impractical, and few would be willing to spend points on such things. He lifted a glass of red wine to his lips with a slight uptick at the corner of his mouth. He was curious to know if Chen Yi could refuse a woman who threw herself at him. If he's not experienced enough, it's actually quite difficult for a regular man to refuse a woman who offers herself, especially an assertive and voluptuous beauty. Just as Chen Yi and his companions had just landed in the central plaza, a global announcement abruptly rang in the ears of all players. Event notice: player Sword Without End grandly and lovingly sent GE 9999 roses, creating a sea of flowers above her. Let's extend our sincere blessings to them. Chen Yi and the others hadn't even stabilized themselves. A sea of roses floated up once more above GE's head. The players around the central plaza, who hadn't seen much of the world, were left stunned and gaping at the scene, standing there in shock. Meanwhile, GE frowned slightly, looking up at the sea of flowers above, with a flash of displeasure and confusion in her eyes. Tuberculosis Rabbit spoke with an expressionless face. Sword Without End, I remember him, the one who likes to pose as a sage. I just saw him last night at the silver party. This kid is being a bit too provocative. What I mean is we should just go and annihilate his entire clan. Provocation. Barefaced provocation. This simply can't be called provocation. It's like throwing Chen Yi's face on the ground and stomping on it hard. Whom could you possibly send flowers to, and you choose GE? And to send a sea of 9999 roses? What's the deal? What is that supposed to mean? Carve out a path then. Chen Yi lightly raised his eyebrows and looked weirdly at the vehicle leaderboard in front of him. Just to see that the vehicle ranked 4th in the global vehicle leaderboard. Its original name was Traceless Green Peak, but now it had suddenly changed to. Don't misunderstand, I need to send some flowers to get some guardian points, but I don't have many female friends around, and I was a bit lost as to whom to send them. Sending them randomly seems a bit of loss. So I just sent them to that little girl by your side. This can also earn the young lady some charm points. Consider it thanks for your easy surrender last time. That is if the global vehicle leaderboard had enough space. Otherwise, with such a name wanting to be on the leaderboard, it would indeed be a bit awkward to handle. He stared at the name of this vehicle, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, not because the vehicle name was too long. It was because when Sword Without End sent the Rose C to GE just now, he suddenly thought about something, that if Sword Without End suddenly sent a Rose C, there must be something up, and if he were Sword Without End, without adding as a friend, how would he get in touch with himself? The first thing he thought of was to change the name of his vehicle. Sure enough, when he looked at the vehicle leaderboard, the other party had indeed changed the name of his vehicle. Feeling as if there was an unexpected understanding between them, Chen Yi shook his head casually and changed the name of his own vehicle as well. Boss is generous, send another one, boss. After that, he didn't bother with it anymore and glanced at the group of players queuing for tasks not far away, queuing up and naturally leaving a clear path. He strided toward the sculpture at the end of the road to see what tasks were available. The central square was already in Yancheng. More precisely, it seems like every city has a central square. The sculpture was not there originally, it appeared in Yancheng after the main city task was completed, where players could check the task interface in front of the sculpture and accept the tasks they desired. There are 8 sculptures. Each sculpture can accept tasks. Global Vehicle Leaderboard. Rank 1 Vehicle, Boss is generous, send another one, Boss. Owner, Chen Yi. Vehicle Rating, 4630. Rank 4 Vehicle, don't misunderstand, I need to send some flowers. Owner, Sword Without End. Vehicle Rating, 2980. Li Yide, who had just killed a bratty boss, looked strangely at the global vehicle leaderboard in front of him, feeling that the normally fine vehicle leaderboard had become a bit odd after the name changes of rank 1 and 4 vehicles. The style seemed a bit off. But it looked like ranks 1 and 4 were passionately interacting, chatting casually like big shots. Which made the other serious vehicle names on the leaderboard seem a bit odd. For example, the rank 3 vehicle Eternal Night Monarch, originally a cool name, placed between the two, suddenly gave a rather strange impression, as if it didn't fit in with the big shots. Li Yide hesitated briefly before deciding to join the fun. After all, his vehicle also had a ranking, and this would show they were all big shots. Soon, the vehicle leaderboard, Rank 10 vehicle underwent a change. Rank 10 vehicle, the two brothers are really extravagant, using a 100 points vehicle renaming coupon so casually. Owner, Li Yide. Vehicle rating, 1392. Cough. Feeling the envious glances of the surrounding players toward him, Li Yide's foxtail naturally drooped as he waved his hand indifferently. Get on with your things, we're just messing around with nothing better to do. People at our level are very casual about these things. Black Trench City. A player dressed in a suit looked at the global vehicle leaderboard in front of him weirdly, feeling a bit perplexed, as if the big shots on the leaderboard seemed to have their own little groups. Why didn't they call him? Did they look down on his low rank? That couldn't be. If that butt-plug kid rank 10 could get into the circle, why couldn't he? He hesitated slightly but decided to also change the name of his vehicle to see the attitude of this little group first. Although the global vehicle leaderboard is not a combat power leaderboard, it can generally reflect a person's strength and wealth. Those who can make it to the leaderboard are not ordinary by any means. Except for that butt-plug kid rank 10. God knows how that butt-plug kid managed to modify that thing to over 1,000 points. Chapter 86. Giving you a rose planet to check out the special effects. Soon. There was a change on the global vehicle leaderboard again. Rank 3 vehicle, being pressed between a few tycoons, I'm really feeling some trepidation. Might as well pay my respects to the rank 1 big shot for the new year. Owner, Wang Go. Vehicle rating, 3128. Following closely. It was as if someone had poked a hornet's nest. The previously not so popular vehicle renaming coupons in the store suddenly saw a surge in sales. The vehicles in the top 100 of the leaderboard had almost all changed their names. The names were more nonsensical and weird than the next. Rank 6 vehicle, ahem, actually I just came up to join in the fun. Rank 12 vehicle, let's test the one below, the next line to the phrase scattered flowers are about to dazzle the eyes is. Rank 13 vehicle, don't know, next one. Rank 14 vehicle, can't afford it, pass. Rank 18 vehicle. The entire global vehicle leaderboard had gone off the rails, veering toward the direction of a chat channel. Everyone's conversation was harmonious. Everybody knew that the vehicle names they changed could be seen by players around the globe. Which means, players around the world were watching these top 100 vehicle leaderboard players socialize in their small circles through this method. This sense of superiority made many feel secretly exhilarated. Even though it cost 100 points to change a name once, no one cared. Everyone tried to show off their strengths and continuously display their awkward humor. They also vaguely revealed their amiability and wealth. No one used foul language, nor were there any passive-aggressive comments. After all, this was essentially a global broadcast, and it was important to maintain a certain quality. It was quite amusing. On the global vehicle leaderboard, everyone was clear about what the other ranked players were thinking, but no one spilled the beans, quietly savoring this time of superior feelings exclusive to the big shots. What are they up to? Standing in the central plaza, Tuberculosis Rabbit somewhat boredly took out a cigarette from his pocket and tossed it into his mouth, casually glancing at the global vehicle leaderboard in front of him. Yi had gone in to accept a mission. He was waiting outside. But for some reason, Yi had been inside for quite some time. Was accepting a mission that difficult? Or was it because there were too many missions and it was hard to choose due to the wide variety? He wondered if there were any high-reward missions, but satisfying Yi's expectations seemed a bit difficult. Yi's expectation was to buy everything in the store. At this moment, those on the global vehicle leaderboard had already started playing Idiom Solitaire. Rank 6 vehicle, let's do Idiom Solitaire, do as one pleases. Rank 7 vehicle, heartless despite wealth. Rank 8 vehicle, an army with a just cause. Rank 9 vehicle, a teacher known for his/her accomplishments. Rank 10 vehicle, a name that will last for all eternity. Tuberculosis Rabbit looked at the people on the vehicle leaderboard with a strange expression. He could faintly sense what they were up to. They were showing off. And it was that hidden kind of showing off. The so-called hidden showing off is when someone appears normal, but you just feel like they are showing off. He could even guess what the rank 11 vehicle owner was doing. Probably frantically searching beta for idioms starting with the word ancient, afraid to be a step too late and appear uncultured. Just then, a series of world announcements suddenly rang out. Event notice: player Zhou Ping generously and lovingly sent out 9,999 roses to Ms. Lu Zioqi with a grand gesture. Let's send our heartfelt congratulations to them. It played 5 times in a row. That wasn't all. Then, players suddenly noticed an unfamiliar name that had made it to rank 100 on the global vehicle leaderboard. Rank 100 vehicle, let me announce to everyone, today is the 30-day anniversary for me and my love Ms. Lu Zioki. My goal is to take down the number 1 spot on the charm leaderboard for her and give her the limited edition title that comes with it. I hope other brothers can bear the pain and let it go, and not compete with me for the spot, especially the big brother in the top spot. I'm counting on you to do me this favor. Owner, Zhou Ping. Vehicle rating, 193. Right after that, the rating of this vehicle started climbing rapidly. And its ranking on the leaderboard was quickly moving up as well. It stopped only after reaching the 10th place. Just enough to knock down that butt plug kid a notch, turning him into the rank 11 vehicle. Charm leaderboard. Tuberculosis Rabbit thoughtfully looked toward the 2 exclusive event leaderboards. Rose Guardian leaderboard. Rank 1, Zhou Ping, 49995 Guardian points. Rank 2, Chen Yi, 30096 Guardian points. Rank 3, Sword Without End, 9999 Guardian points. Peerless Beauty Charm leaderboard. Rank 1, Lu Zioki, 50012 Charm points. Rank 2, Ji, 40095 Charm points. Rank 3. And being on the leaderboard came with exclusive titles. The number 1 titles respectively were Godly Rich Gentleman and Peerless Beauty. Second to third place titles respectively were Rich Tycoon and Great Beauty. 4th to 10th place titles respectively were Tycoon and Beauty. Depending on the title level, the effects varied, and without a doubt, the top ranked titles were the best. And this man who suddenly appeared on the vehicle leaderboard was after exactly these 2 number 1 titles. There are actually quite a few people who can spend 50k points. But not many are willing to do so. After all, if you have that many points, it would be better to buy props that can enhance combat power in the limited purchase mall. Why waste them on the Rose Guardian event? Even if sending roses earns you Guardian points, they aren't very useful. In the exclusive store for the Rose Guardian event, most of the items are flashy props. Frankly speaking, they're all sorts of special effects props whose function is to make you look more flamboyant. Props that enhance strength are scarce. Therefore, this Zhou Ping, coming in with 50k points to dominate the leaderboard, had pretty much already reserved 2 number 1 title levels for himself. After all, not many people are willing to compete for this leaderboard. Not a single person on the global vehicle leaderboard responded to Zhou Ping, who suddenly popped up. Clearly, they were dissatisfied with Zhou Ping's untimely leaderboard challenge, which interrupted their fun game of word chains. In just a short 10 minutes or so, the people on the global vehicle leaderboard seemed to have already formed a small clique, beginning to subtly reject Zhou Ping, the outsider. No one changed the name of their vehicle in response to Zhou Ping. The vehicle leaderboard that had been buzzing just now had suddenly become eerily quiet. It felt somewhat awkward. Meanwhile, Chen Yi was frowning, standing in front of a statue, propping his chin with one hand in deep thought and not uttering a word, totally unaware of what was happening outside. He had originally planned to come over and see if there were any high-reward quests. But he had hardly moved closer, when a prompt sounded by his ear. Ding! Player Chen Yi detected, the individual from Yancheng who killed the most insect race monsters during the extraterrestrial invader event, and as Yancheng is the first city in the world to resolve the extraterrestrial invader event, player Chen Yi will be granted one-time free quest publishing rights as a reward for player Chen Yi's bravery in the first battle. Indeed, there are many quests in this quest center. Some are released by the game, such as killing minotaur monsters outside the city, etc. Some are officially released by Yancheng, such as the need for 10 men to transport garbage from inside to outside the city. Completing a quest can yield points, props, and more. The specific rewards depend on how the quest publisher sets them. The rewards for quests released by the game are naturally fixed. But for quests published by people, the rewards are set by the quest publisher themselves. For instance, if Chen Yi wants to publish a quest, he needs to specify on the quest requirements, how many people he needs, what rewards he can offer, what kind of people are needed, and so on. And his right to publish a quest for free means he can publish a quest that theoretically all players in Yancheng can accept, and he doesn't need to pay any reward, the game will pay it on his behalf. Whether players actually accept the quest, however, will depend on their willingness. It's just that he couldn't think of a suitable quest to publish for the moment. What he needed most right now was points. So figuring out a way to publish a quest that could earn him points was his priority. Thus, the first quest requirement he thought of was Quest requirement, all players in Yancheng to transfer 1 point to Chen Yi immediately. He wasn't asking for much. 1 point should be fine, right? Yancheng currently had over 1 million people. If each person gave him 1 point, he would have 1 million points, making a fortune instantly. Unfortunately, the quest was rejected, it didn't pass the review process. Just then, Chen Yi's eyes lit up, suddenly thinking of something. Without any hesitation, he tried entering the task target. A system alert suddenly rang out in the ears of all players in Yancheng and abruptly a quest panel popped up in front of them. Ding! A city-wide quest from Yancheng's first battle hero Chen Yi. Quest target, I wish for player Chen Yi's account to suddenly have an additional 100,000 points. Repeat this sentence 1,000 times. Quest reward, after completing the quest, you may collect 50 points. Would you like to accept the quest? Many players, seeing this panel that suddenly popped up, were stunned in place. Weren't quests supposed to be accepted voluntarily at the statue in the central square? How could it pop up like this? But this quest target. Many started calculating quietly inside their heads. If they were to wish for their own account to have an extra 100,000 points, they'd likely get nothing even after a full day of effort, but if they wish for Chen Yi's account to have an extra 100,000 points, they'd at least have a guaranteed 50 points after repeating the sentence 1,000 times. 50 points wasn't a small amount. How many monsters would they have to kill to get 50 points? Killing one Minotaur monster only rewarded a few points. Between dreaming and a sure thing, most people chose the latter. Meanwhile, prompts kept sounding in front of Chen Yi. Ding! 180,000 people have accepted the quest. Ding! 220,000 people have accepted the quest. Yi, you've finally come out. Tuberculosis Rabbit, who was getting a bit anxious waiting outside, flicked his cigarette butt to the ground and stamped it out, striding up to meet him. Is this city-wide quest you're doing, Yi? Chen Yi tilted his head to glance at Ji standing behind Tuberculosis Rabbit and chuckled lightly with a lifted corner of his mouth. I'll gift you a rose planet later, let's check out the special effects together. Chapter 87. This is a special effect that covers the whole world. He heard the constant sounds of players accepting tasks ringing in his ears. Chen Yi's eyes narrowed as he looked toward the Rose Guardians event store and the limited time marketplace, already thinking about how to spend the points he would soon acquire. After the points were credited. First, he wanted to get a defensive prop for himself, which was on sale in the limited time marketplace, and get one for the Tuberculosis Rabbit as well. The only pity was that in neither marketplace were there any skill fragments available for purchase. Only props were being sold. Even the Minotaur monsters outside the city didn't drop skill fragments. Just props and points rewards, and the probability of dropping props was extremely low. Additionally, props could now also be obtained from the Sands of Time map outside the city. In summary, the means to obtain props were considerably more numerous than those to obtain skill fragments. Currently, it seemed the only way to acquire skill fragments was through the 5 that players dropped upon death. Beyond that, there were no other sources of skill fragments, except for the previous 520 gift packet for 88 points that could yield 5 random skill fragments. Of course, in Yancheng, there had already emerged a bird market where skill fragments could be traded. One could use points to buy surplus skill fragments from other players or sell their own excess and unwanted fragments. Overall, the avenues to acquire skill fragments were still far fewer than those for props. Soon, already a full 400,000 people had accepted the task, and more players were continuing to do so, though the pace had slowed and was nearly saturating. Yancheng was a small city to begin with. Once the trouble started, many people fled back to their rural homes for refuge. Given the erosion of the Mei rules, having 400,000 people take on the task was quite impressive. There were still many who were unwilling to accept the task. Meanwhile, Chen Yi could also hear the constant sounds of wishing around him. 10,000 points will be added to the account of Yancheng task publisher Chen Yi. 10,000 points will be added to the account of Yancheng task publisher Chen Yi. The whole scene looked particularly bizarre. Hearing so many people chant his name in unison for the first time, Chen Yi, with a strange expression, returned to his sled uneasily, and started the vehicle, stopping it on the rooftop of a tall building. It must be said, the feeling was quite strange. The vehicle he had just acquired, Septagon Badge, was already fully charged. This prop would start charging whenever someone talked about him nearby and would be fully charged once 10,000 sentences had been spoken. After several deliveries to the Sea of Flowers for GE, it easily reached full charge. Being the subject of 10,000 sentences from nearby people. Frankly, for the average player, that was quite difficult. After all, even if you defecate in the street, you won't attract many onlookers to stop and stare, let alone discuss the matter. Internal thoughts don't count, it must be spoken out loud, and moreover, by nearby people. But for him, being the subject of public gossip was all too common. Even if he did nothing, simply walking around the city would nearly suffice to charge it, given the numerous titles hovering above his head. It was hard for people not to talk. Even hiding away wouldn't work. The titles would break through the ceiling and still evoke discussion. That was also why he didn't live in a bungalow. Other homes have chimneys on their rooftops, but his bungalow would be topped with a shining column of light, visible from far away. The light from his titles was concentrated such that it hardly illuminated the surroundings. It didn't disperse. If he walked through the dark night, the titles above him hardly lit the path ahead. But the penetrating power of this light was exceptionally strong. Even from hundreds of meters away, one could clearly see a pillar of light approaching. A beacon in the deep, unmanned sea engulfed by the darkness of the night, as if even the rocks were forced to emit a painful scream. In the distance, a lighthouse was slowly creeping closer toward you. Coming to rescue you. However, although his Septagon Badge was fully charged, it couldn't be recharged again until the current charge was used up, only then would the count reset and allow it to charge again. There was no way to save up multiple charges at once. As long as people around him talked about him, it could charge. In theory, if the Tuberculosis Rabbit muttered his name in his sleep, even if both of them were asleep, the badge could be charged. Unfortunately, the Tuberculosis Rabbit had his own words to say at night, and didn't talk about him. That couldn't be controlled, could it? Even if it could be controlled, it was still better not to. Enduring the Tuberculosis Rabbit's sleep talk all night, as though sleeping in a card game room, was already the limit of his endurance. If he also had to listen to the rabbit discussing him all night while asleep, that would be unbearable. Anybody trying to sleep at night would be unable to if they heard someone continuously talking about them right next to them. And especially in a dream. That'd be too eerie. Just then, a notification sound suddenly rang in Chen Yi's ear. Ding, 10,000 points have been credited to your account. Simple and to the point. With just 22 characters, but the information conveyed made Chen Yi extremely satisfied. That fast. Chen Yi's eyes flickered with a hint of astonishment as he gazed at his points balance in disbelief. How much time had passed since the first player started making a wish? Barely 10 minutes at most. Just 10 minutes and the first 100,000 points had already been credited? When he saw his account balance, the corners of his mouth involuntarily curled up, resembling an author who, having finally received his royalties, could afford to splurge on a hot pot meal downstairs. Account balance, 118023. Nearly 120,000 points. Did it really come through so quickly? The Tuberculosis Rabbit, standing next to him on the edge of the rooftop, perked up its ears at his words, leaned forward and looked at Yi's publicly displayed personal panel. Seeing the points balance, it too felt somewhat moved and said, "So it really works. I've thought about something like this before but never expected it could actually be done." "What kind of thing?" Chen Yi responded casually without turning his head, his eyes brimming with anticipation, wondering if there would be a second arrival of 100,000 points. He had no cost for releasing this task, the officials would cover the task rewards on his behalf. He was making pure profit. The players were also earning pure profit. Both parties were making a killing. I shall name it morally binding bundle wish technique. The Tuberculosis Rabbit smacked its lips and then gazed into the distance, sighing deeply before continuing leisurely. On Blue Star, aren't there several religious beliefs? Every day, there are believers who pray, but few prayers are answered. I was thinking they should coordinate. Gather all the believers from around the world. For example, if it's Monday today, headquarters would issue a command, all believers are to pray for a certain person's work to go smoothly. In this scenario, it would be difficult for God to pretend he didn't hear, even if he wanted to. It would greatly increase the chances of prayers being answered successfully. Moreover, a variety of pay-to-win services could be developed, like paying for a VIP queue or skipping the line with a yearly VIP. I think that would be much more interesting. Chen Yi glanced at the tuberculosis rabbit somewhat speechlessly, too lazy to respond verbally. He had grown accustomed to the rabbit's erratic thought process. Oh right. Seeing that Yi didn't respond to him, the tuberculosis rabbit wasn't embarrassed. Instead, he skillfully changed the subject, a talent of his that ensured conversations never fell flat. While you were off accepting the task, someone mentioned they wanted to hit the leaderboards, hoping you would let him take the 2 top spots of the Rose Guardian. He changed his vehicle's name, but no one paid attention to him. Chen Yi frowned slightly and started browsing the global vehicle leaderboard. He saw a vehicle with a rather lengthy name listed at the 10th spot. Just making an official announcement to everyone, today is the 30-day anniversary of my beloved, Ms. Lu Zioki. Especially the big brother at rank 1, please do me the honor. He glanced at it casually before looking away. Don't bother with him. Let him do whatever he wants. If he wants the top spot, let him pay for it. It's my first time seeing someone beg for a spot on the leaderboard. He didn't linger on the thought, instead, he turned around to open Ji's chat box. After a few seconds of heartache, he decided to send a Rose Planet. 100,000 points, oh. Such a luxury, this was the second time he had ever spent so much in one go. The next second, a global announcement appeared before everyone's ears and, as a banner, conspicuously appeared above every player's view. It was impossible to focus on anything else. Even players entangled in a boss fight couldn't help but turn to look at the floating announcement. Announcement: Player Chen Yi stands leisurely on a high spot, enjoying the worship and envy of all players with a smile that says money is no object, as he sends Ms. G 99,999 Rose Planets. Let us extend our utmost respect and honor to both of them. A banner framed in dazzling lights and adorned with roses appeared before the eyes of all players. Following that, before Ji, standing behind Chen Yi, could react, she suddenly felt herself lifted into the air. Beneath her feet, the rooftop surface split, and a pillar composed of roses rose steadily, only stopping after reaching several tens of meters in height. Looking around, she now stood atop the rose pillar, at the highest point of Yanshanj. She could even feel gazes from every direction in Yanshanj looking up at her, causing her eyes to betray a hint of panic, and her heart was slightly overwhelmed by the sensation. Then, roses began to appear out of nowhere in the sky, slowly falling, covering the sky. The roses raining down upon those on the ground made everyone realize what magical reality looked like. But if Chen Yi were to stroll around other places, he would discover it wasn't just above their heads where flowers rained down. Instead, a shower of roses had begun to fall from the skies all over the world. This was an effect that enveloped the entire globe. All players could witness this grand spectacle because of the 100,000 points Chen Yi had spent. Chapter 88. Giving you face, calling you big bro. But it wasn't over yet. A pillar made of roses suddenly rose beneath Chen Yi's feet at the same time, lifting him into the air alongside Ji, standing side by side, less than a meter apart. Then a prompt sounded in his ear. Ding, after a 10-second countdown, Chen Yi, you will have a 10-second global broadcast right. During these 10 seconds, every move you make will be watched by all players around the world, and your voice will also be heard by all players worldwide. Please think of your declaration of love during these 10 seconds. Immediately after, a world announcement once again appeared before all players' eyes. Event announcement: Player Chen Yi is about to declare his love to the Lady Ji. Let us all witness this beautiful moment together. Is this how you show no respect? Zhou Ping, who was chatting with his underlings with a smile, had his smile freeze on his face when he heard the prompt by his ear, and slowly sank into contemplation as he looked towards his vehicle's name on the leaderboards. After a long while, he said in an emotionless soft voice. I've already been very humble, haven't I? Give you face, call you big bro. Give no face, what are you? Really losing face here? At the same time as the prompt sounded in his ear, Chen Yi was slightly stunned, and then he quickly reacted. Immediately after, he activated all the fashion props in his backpack at lightning speed, putting them on, and then frantically wiped his face a few times with his hands, adjusting his facial expression to the best state. Only then did he take a deep breath and look towards the countdown, which was at its last second. As the sky countdown was about to end, almost all players simultaneously looked up at the sky, gazing at the giant screen beneath the sky filled with flowers. As the countdown on the screen came to an end, the screen first went black, then suddenly brightened. Immediately after, all players saw Chen Yi and Ji standing on top of the light pillar. Many players had heard of Chen Yi's name, but this was their first time seeing him in person. And look at Ji, petite and pretty-faced, in a naturally draped and form-fitting camisole dress, which made people feel a surge of protectiveness, while also wanting to pinch her cheeks that seemed almost pinchable enough to squeeze water out of. Is this the person someone is willing to throw away 100,000 points for? In fact, most players were more curious about what a woman that could compel a patron to toss away 100,000 points looked like. Although seeing her in person didn't disappoint them, they still felt a bit of a letdown. After all, she was pretty, but she was not quite at the level of a fairy. When everyone's gaze fell onto Chen Yi standing on the floral pillar, however, they were left puzzled and frozen in place. They saw Chen Yi, dressed in a green robe, holding a folding fan, his posture as straight as a pine tree, calmly gazing into the distance. His deep pupils seemed to hide deep thoughts about this era. Underneath his calm face seemed to be buried endless contemplation about the world. His left hand hung naturally by his side, right hand holding the fan at his chest. He looked just like a scholar on his way to the capital city for an examination. From beginning to end, Chen Yi in the screen maintained that pose without any movement, until in the final second of the footage, he withdrew his gaze from afar. His pupils were deep, his bearing seemed to carry a magnanimous concern for the people of the world. He gazed directly at them through the screen and gave a slight nod. The angle of the nod was just right. It was as if a deity was looking down upon the mortal realm, giving a polite nod in response to the gaze of the common folk. The next second, the screen went dark. From beginning to end, there was not a single sound in the footage. Chen Yi didn't utter even a syllable, it was all silence. Many players exchanged bewildered glances, not sure why, but they felt they had sensed something in Chen Yi that they themselves lacked during that moment. Although he didn't speak, for some reason, it felt so cool. If it were them with the opportunity to be seen globally, they definitely would have been so excited that they'd stutter and tremble, but look at Chen Yi, it seemed as if he didn't care about the global exposure at all. He was even too lazy to say a word. With a light touch, he had moved past the event. What was this? This was status. Use your ultimate move, your ultimate move. In some suburban area, Sword Without End stood on a flying sword hovering in midair, squatting on the blade, butt sticking out and holding a tissue, looking at the scene on the screen with anger surging within him. He couldn't help but roar in a burst of rage. Where's your throne? Your soldiers? Get your character actions together. This is a chance for global exposure, and only you have it in the whole world. Do you realize how precious this opportunity is? And you just finished so casually. He looked despondently at the screen as it gradually darkened, unable to help but punch fiercely into the air with his fist. Such a waste. If it were him, he would definitely show the world what it means to be sword immortal. What it means to have presence. Thinking this, Sword Without End, squatting on the blade, could not help but frown and began to hesitate furiously in his mind. A gift of 100,000 points for 99,999 roses from the Rose Planet could actually get a chance for global exposure. This was global exposure. It's one thing for a player to be on a global announcement, which was already impressive, but for all players to see themselves on a screen was an extraordinary honor. But the price, wasn't it a bit too expensive? A full 100,000 points. Feeling an urge within himself, Sword Without End shook his head fiercely with a serious face, as if to warn himself, and said in a deep voice. You must not act rashly. Remember, you almost lost your life for these 100,000 points in that map. If these points are gone, are you really going to risk your life there again? Sword Without End, with a resolute expression, turned his head to look into the distance, his eyes brimming with coldness. If he were still 24, he would have spent the 100,000 points without hesitation. But at 34, he wouldn't waste the points he had risked his life to earn for a moment's fame. That would be downright foolish. He would not do something as foolish as suffering for vanity's sake. But, this was a global appearance, and who knows if such an opportunity would come again in the future. Even if there were another chance later, it wouldn't be as stunning as this time because, until now, players had no idea that global appearances were even a thing. Moreover, although that map was a matter of life and death, he had already made it out alive once. The success rate for a second entry would surely be much higher, making it not as dangerous. Besides, the points wouldn't be spent in vain, he would also gain 100,000 Guardian points. Guardian points could also fetch quite a few attractive and special props in the shop. After all, wealth is external, while fame is something that accompanies a person for life. After several seconds of contemplation, the firmness on Sword Without End's face slowly faded away. He quickly wiped his behind clean before abruptly standing up with his pants pulled up. Damn it, a true man born between heaven and earth should not waver over a mere pittance. Not bad at all. Tuberculosis Rabbit looked towards Chen Yi, who was slowly descending with the pillar of roses and back to the ground, and spoke with some astonishment, the outfit looks good, quite like a scholarsy type. It has a certain, a scholar who could slay dragons vibe. It's not bad, right? Chen Yi slightly raised his eyebrows and said, it's quite fun, isn't it? He then turned his head to look at Ji beside him and asked with a smile. How does it feel, having a global appearance? A bit nervous. It's okay, you'll get used to it. I should be able to send you another. However, just at that moment, a pillar of roses surged up under Ji's feet once again. Following that, a world announcement once again rang in everyone's ears. Event announcement, player Sword Without End stands aloof and high above, enjoying the worship and envy of all players, with a smile that says money is no object, sending 99,999 roses to Miss Ji. Let us pay our utmost respect to both with our gaze. As the screen lit up, everyone was startled to find that only Sword Without End appeared on the screen. Ji was nowhere to be seen, just Sword Without End standing alone atop the rose pillar in mid-air. But before people could understand why only Sword Without End was on the screen. In the scene, Sword Without End, dressed in pure white tang attire, lifted his head with an icy expression, staring directly at them with eyes full of murderous intent, and beside him stood the quivering 3-foot Ching Feng in mid-air. Before people could react, they suddenly heard a thunderous sound that shook the heart, explosively resounding out of the clear sky in the scene. The so-called bolt from the blue was nothing more than this. Immediately, thick dark clouds suddenly gathered above Sword Without End, even pressing down upon the joyful stars above, making the previously festive scene seem a bit sinister. Countless lightning dragons tumbled within the clouds, as if at any moment a world-ending bolt could strike down. This made many players who were looking up at the screen instinctively hold their breath, feeling a subtle, invisible pressure in their hearts. Ack! A roar filled with fury and bloodlust suddenly erupted in the scene. Sword Without End was seen soaring into the sky, floating in mid-air, standing right below the dark clouds that overshadowed the sun, as if the whole world only contained these dark clouds and Sword Without End holding the green peak. In the scene, the man, with a cold expression carrying a scorn for the heavens, stood out in his white tang attire. In the next second, countless bolts of lightning began emerging from the green peak in his hands. Electricity gathered and extended the length of the blade while rapidly spreading. In less than 2 seconds, the blade astonishingly stretched to nearly a kilometer. From afar, one could only see a man wielding the nearly kilometer-long heaven-opening sword formed from countless bolts of lightning. Without Sword Without End, the path of the sword would be eternally like a long night. Today, one sword will open the celestial gate, and the world shall know Sword Without End. Accompanying the man's deep, powerful voice tinged with a scent of blood in the scene. The very next second, the scene suddenly switched to a wide angle, revealing Sword Without End holding the thousands of feet long green peak, roaring as he slashed at the dark clouds covering the sky above. Open heaven! Break! One sword, cleaving the skies. The dark clouds were immediately cleaved in half by Sword Without End's sword. As sunlight spilled through, the screen slowly faded out. Chapter 89. You little brat, today I really want to see what kind of stuff you're made of. Phew. Feeling somewhat unfulfilled, Sword Without End sat atop his sword, constantly flipping through forums from various regions, checking out other players' comments about him. When he had just sent the Rose Planet to GE, the system reminded him that since he was sending flowers from a distance during the global live broadcast, they would splice his and GE's images together, and he could freely choose how much of the screen GE would occupy. The default was to have each take up half of the screen. Thus, he directly moved GE out of the screen. Since he had a choice, why bother asking how much of the screen the girl should occupy? Obviously, his solo performance was better. So handsome. Is there really such a thing as immortals in this world? I'm still poking minotaur monsters with a spear. How come someone started to split the sky with a sword? I thought we were all alike. Sword Without End kept browsing through various regions' forums, nodding in pleasure and silently liking every praise-filled post. Such a poser, I can't stand it anymore, that arrogant, presumptuous, slick demeanor of his is so uncomfortable to watch, I don't know why you all praise him so much. Truly powerful people are stable, with sword without end's impetuous look, do you really think he could be some kind of boss? Sword without end looked at this post on the forum, expressionless, and turned his gaze towards the city IP to which the forum belonged. Black Trench City Forum. He silently clicked on the avatar of the person who made the post and flipped through their history of posts. Annoyed to death, walking to the company every day takes 10 minutes. Below it was a location tag for the company. Quietly opening the map, he located the office building in Black Trench City and kept zooming in, beginning to check the surrounding communities to see which one would take about a 10-minute walk to the company. I recommend you try Liu's buns, they're really delicious, I eat them every day. Right, there are roughly 3 routes that take 10 minutes by foot, only one of which passes by Liu's bun shop, that is, in the Changzhen community. I'm never living on the top floor again, it leaks whenever it rains, so annoying. Right, a top floor in Changzhen community. Guys, how do you like my hairstyle today? And a selfie. 10 minutes later. Sword without end, with an expressionless face, rode his 3-foot Ching Feng and shot off into the distance. After an unknown amount of time, a voice filled with towering rage, resounded over the skies of Black Trench City. Meet your doom swiftly. You little brat, I'll see what kind of stable stuff you're made of today. Your daddy is coming for you. This old coot. Tuberculosis Rabbit spread his hands helplessly and sighed, I don't know why, but this old thing, who's at an age to settle down, still plays so hard. Dropping 100,000 points just to show off in front of global players. What's the point? At this point, Ji was first on the charm leaderboard, while Chen Yi naturally sat at the top of the Guardian leaderboard. As for Zhou Ping, who had originally declared his intention to fight for the top spot, he had entirely ceased to make a move. No one knew if he simply didn't have enough points. In any case, all had gone quiet. Chen Yi raised his eyebrows slightly and, standing still without speaking, was sliding through the limited time shop, silently memorizing the props he planned to buy later on. Then he glanced at the customer service system that had already appeared on the bottom right corner. It seemed that the customer service staff were already on duty. They were quite fast. He casually opened the customer service feedback and left a message. The shopping mall lacks a shopping cart function, which is extremely inconvenient. With a shopping cart function, he could add all the props he wanted to buy to the cart, and when the points were credited later on, he could buy everything in one go. Instead of like now, having to silently memorize the props he wanted. But as for whether he would receive any points later, he was somewhat anxious. A 1 in 10 million chance doesn't mean that you'll definitely hit it once out of 10 million tries, it could also be that you wouldn't hit it even after 10 billion tries. From this perspective, domestically produced web games are actually quite conscientious. At least if a domestically produced web game announces a 1 in 10 million chance, it means that when you reach the 10 millionth time, they will definitely give you a minimum guarantee. At least you won't be left hanging for the 10 million and first time, of course, before you reach 10 million tries, don't even dream of winning anything. Hey! Chen Yi suddenly furrowed his brows and looked at the panel that had just popped up in front of him. Ding! It has been detected that a sufficient number of players now possess the Wilderness Pass, and the Wilderness Map will officially open on June 2 at 9 o'clock am. At that time, players holding the Wilderness Pass may bring a maximum of 1 companion into the wilderness to start reclaiming. This map is a large-scale map. Please prepare for reclaiming. Wilderness Pass. He nodded thoughtfully, having obtained the Wilderness Pass a long time ago but never having had the chance to use it. He had originally thought it would be like the Sands of Time, where only after someone had started to reclaim the Sands of Time, would subsequent players holding the Sands of Time Pass be permitted to enter the map. But this Wilderness Pass. It turned out that only players holding the pass are qualified to start reclaiming? Chen Yi shook his head and didn't think further. Without any concrete information, there was no way he could make any preliminary preparations. All he knew for now was that it was a large-scale map, and presumably, there wouldn't be a small number of players involved in reclaiming it. There was a brief introduction on the Wilderness Pass. Wilderness, that's a place where even a saint can't help but fall. But there's not much to glean from this introduction. It sounds like the wilderness must be a pretty dangerous place, especially if even a saint can fall there. It's only just before noon on June 1. All of that is tomorrow morning's problem, there's no point in thinking about it now. 9 hours later. All the players had completed their tasks. In total, they had earned 300,000 points. Out of which, 100,000 points were spent to gift GE a rose planet, and the remaining 100,000 points were all thrown into the exclusive store purchases. 200,000 points were just enough to buy everything they wanted from the event store, and the other 100,000 points were just enough to buy all the props needed by both him and Tuberculosis Rabbit. It was just perfect. Phew. Inside a hot pot restaurant, Tuberculosis Rabbit shoved a scalding piece of lamb freshly scooped from the pot into his mouth, with the steam carrying the fragrant aroma hitting the back of his throat. Huff, huff. Tuberculosis Rabbit kept panting, blowing air from his mouth until the heat from the lamb slice in his mouth subsided slightly before chewing it a few times and swallowing it, savoring the lingering taste of lamb in his mouth before contentedly reaching out his chopsticks again for another slice of lamb floating at the bottom of the clear soup pot. Yi, you should try this. It's really delicious. So satisfying, it's really too satisfying. I haven't eaten so delightfully in a long time. Ever since food began to be sold in personal panels, many restaurants had opened for business. After all, personal panels only offer dry food, no problem if you want to buy steamed buns, rice, or eggs. Even lamb is available. But if you think about buying a hot plate of fried rice with eggs, that's just nonsense. With a stable source of food ingredients, many restaurants in Yancheng had opened for business. Currently, the pricing is quite chaotic, with no reasonable pricing system in place. But there is generally a rough price range. For simple meals like fried rice with eggs or rice with toppings, a serving is roughly between 4-8 points. The price of a bowl of noodles is also between 3-5 points. As for a big meal like hot pot, that's over 100 points per meal. It's definitely expensive. Even the cheapest simple meal is beyond the means of many players. The solution is simple. If you can't afford it, don't eat it. In the store, 1 point can buy 10 steamed buns that can fill you up. A bag of such steamed buns can last for 2 or 3 days. You can't expect me to lower the price because you can't afford it, right? If you don't even have 1 point, then you'll have to figure out a way yourself. I've almost spent all of my 200,000 guardian points. Apart from your character action, I also bought a few character actions for myself. I also acquired several vehicle trails and I snatched up most of the limited wing exchange coupons from the store. Chen Yi picked up a piece of lamb with his chopsticks and swished it through his sesame sauce dipping dish before putting it into his mouth. Satisfied, he also took a deep breath, refreshing. It had been nearly 2 months since they last had hot pot. This time was truly gratifying. By the way, Ji, what did you buy with all those charm points? He looked up curiously and turned to Ji, who sat across the table, and asked. He had 200,000 guardian points. Ji had even more, a whopping 300,000 charm points. After hesitating for a moment and pausing, Ji finally spoke. There was nothing in the Rose Guardian exclusive shop that could enhance combat power, so I bought 2 character actions as well. They're unique character actions from a global exclusive event. Geared towards females. And they seem to be couples character actions, quite like the 2 you bought, Yi. Really? Surprise flickered in Chen Yi's eyes as he looked at his personal panel's character action introduction information and, after carefully reading through it, found indeed a line of fine print. Then he smiled satisfactorily and nodded his head. Well, that's indeed nice. Next time we'll have the chance, we'll try out what the effects are like. Who knows, there might even be some interactive effects. Character actions have cooldown times. Basically, most character actions have cooldown times ranging from 1 hour to 48 hours. Some character actions even come with a usage limit, like the most expensive character action he had purchased this time. It was limited to 3 uses. Just then, the owner of the hot pot restaurant came over to them, bowing respectfully and speaking in a low voice. Good evening, Yi. Our little fatty sheep hot pot restaurant is honored to have Yi visit on our grand opening day. All expenditures of Yi at our shop today will be on the house. We've recently added a new service since the reopening. I wonder if Yi would honor us by trying it out. What service? Chen Yi picked up another piece of lamb, dipped it in the spicy chili oil next to him and put it in his mouth. After swallowing, he turned to look at the approaching owner. Let's hear it. Then he tapped the cigarette box on the edge, popping out a cigarette with only half of it sticking out of the box, and passed the box to the owner. Here, have one. Ah, thank you so much, Yi. You are too kind. The owner, bowing with respectful hands, took the cigarette out of the box and then turned to signal outside with a clap of his hands. Didn't you hear Yi's order? Hurry up and get in here. Chapter 90. Please call me, King Malphite. As the boss finished speaking, 3 girls dressed as football babes entered in single file and stood in front of Chen Yi, bowing in unison as they crisply said, "Good afternoon, boss." Only 3. Tuberculosis Rabbit slightly scorned and pursed his lips toward the people at the next table. It would make others think we can't afford more, bring 10 more. 10 per person. Brother might have misunderstood. The boss wiped the non-existent sweat from his forehead with a slightly embarrassed expression, stepped aside to reveal the 3 girls behind him, and then spoke, "Our services are legitimate here. Each one has been obtained through a large number of points, 3 is already the limit our store can handle. Any more would be a bit too much for us to afford. Come on, give the boss a dance." As these words were said, the 3 girls suddenly stood erect, and in unison, raised their right arms to gaze into the distance. With soft music playing, the trio began to dance gracefully. A background resembling that of an ancient tavern appeared behind them. Their clothing was not revealing. They looked like 3 art students who had been studying dance for a long time. 5 minutes later, the dance ended. How was it? The boss standing by looked at Chen Yi expectantly, waiting anxiously on the spot. Not bad at all. Chen Yi gave a brief glance and then diverted his attention back, checking the time on his personal panel and began to contemplate what to prepare for a trip to the wilderness map. Let's bring some coffee first, this thing might come in handy. In case of a life and death situation, the perpetual motion machine could also save Tuberculosis Rabbit. If he likes it, that's good. That, The boss hesitated for a moment with some unease, then tentatively whispered with a flattering smile, "Yi, I have an idea, please hear me out. The dances of these girls are actually character actions, 1,500 points each, a total of 4,500 for 3. My idea is that in the future, customers can order a dance for 100 points to watch once. In this way, customers can enjoy the dance for a minimal cost of points, and the restaurant can recoup its costs quickly. Furthermore, the girls can earn points, potentially even more than from hunting monsters. It is a win-win-win. We want to recruit a few more girls like this and provide them with character actions as well. As it stands, we're a bit short on points. I was wondering if it's possible to..." Heh. The boss chuckled with a face of appeasement but did not continue. "I understand." Chen Yi, having caught on, glanced sideways at the boss and then retracted his gaze, immersing all the new mutton slices into the pot with a smile. "Looking for investment, are we?" The boss gave a sheepish laugh, seeming a bit embarrassed, but soon he became serious. 2,000 points. If he would invest 2,000 points, from then on, this restaurant would give Yi a 20% dividend every week, and all of Yi's future expenses here would be waived, counted as part of the restaurant's operating costs. Just don't know if Yi is willing or not. It's your turn. Without saying much more, Chen Yi casually transferred 2,000 points to the boss and waved his hand. "If you don't have anything else, you may go. 2,000 points is not a lot for me, but if these 2,000 points can help you run this restaurant better, then they're worth it. Go on." "Thank you, Yi, thank you so much." Excitement flashed in the boss's eyes as he bowed his thanks repeatedly and then quickly retreated with the girls. Soon, a waiter came over with several plates of fresh meat dishes. Chen Yi looked at the hot broth in front of him, where the slices of mutton were bobbing up and down, gradually changing from red to white, patiently waiting with evident enjoyment. He had a habit when eating hot pot. He pursued the 4 tastes. First, the original flavor, with the light taste of mutton lingering in the mouth. Second, the sesame sauce, the rich sesame paste fully enhancing the flavor of the mutton. Third, the spicy oil, wrapping the mutton in the enticing, freshly boiled hot chili oil, perfectly marrying the spicy heat with the flavor of the meat. Fourth, the vinegar sauce, with sesame sauce as the base, touched with spicy oil, and complemented by fragrant vinegar, making the entire sauce bowl refreshing and appetizing, another distinct flavor. With each bite of mutton, a new method of eating emerged, creating a variety of tastes, a satisfying feast. An hour later, Chen Yi put down his chopsticks, wiped the grease from the corners of his mouth with a napkin, stood up, looked at the boss who was waiting at the side, and gave a casual pat on his shoulder, "Keep the restaurant running well. I really like the flavor. Don't let me find the place closed or something else wrong next time I come, that would be quite disappointing." "Rest assured, Yi." The boss nodded solemnly, "As long as Yi comes, this restaurant will definitely be open." "Then that's settled." Chen Yi waved his hand nonchalantly before getting up and walking out of the shop. "I'm off then, wish the boss booming business." Standing at the door watching Chen Yi leave, the boss breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Chen Yi's receding figure and the increasingly invisible glow of the title above his head. But the very next second, he couldn't help but jump up with excitement in his eyes. "Nice. Perfect." He then dashed to the cashier's desk, his face full of excitement, instructing his cashier, "Print out a notice first thing tomorrow, just 8 characters. Yi's investiture, quality assured." "No, wait, go print it now, go with the back kitchen to find those abandoned print shops, and then sneak in to operate the machines and start printing. Hurry, go now, right now." After the cashier left, the boss let out a slight breath of relief, feeling like he was walking on clouds as he leaned back in his chair, a hint of excitement crossing his face. It wasn't that he really needed the 2,000 points from Yi's investment. But with Yi's investiture, the shop was as if under a real protective umbrella. Before Yi came, quite a number of people had already come looking for trouble under various pretenses. Once the words Yi's investiture appeared at the entrance, he wanted to see who would dare to cause trouble. Especially today, several customers had come in and only ordered the pot base, then bought ingredients on their personal panels. What a joke! If all the customers of a hot pot restaurant did this, wouldn't it be a loss? But he didn't say much about it. After all, it was the first day of business, and those customers looked strong, with the leader bearing a fatal strike title. Presumably, they would be even harder to deal with. But such things won't happen in the future. From now on, no matter who comes knocking, seeing the words Yi's investiture, they'd have to sit down quietly. Giving Yi a 2,000 points dividend in the first week, is that too conspicuous? The boss hesitated, standing still without speaking. He was pondering how to quickly return the 2,000 points to Yi, and then to send some extra points his way. "Bye-bye." Chen Yi looked toward Ji and said with a smile while resting on his cane, "If I have a chance, I'll see you another day. Tomorrow Tuberculosis Rabbit and I are going to explore a new map, so I won't be joining you for the grind." "Oh." Ji nodded, her mouth slightly agape but not speaking, her lip glossed under the moonlight tempting enough to make one want to give her a big smooch. Her slightly plump cheeks were enough to evoke the desire in any man to pinch them. She hesitated for a moment, then lifted her head to meet Chen Yi's eyes. "I might have to go out tomorrow." "Go out?" Chen Yi looked slightly puzzled, his eyebrows raised as he glanced around, and upon confirming he hadn't time traveled, he turned to Ji with a curious expression. "What are the times coming to? Is there still talk of business trips or vacations?" "It's not that." Ji shook her head, her pupils serious and worried as she said, "My brother is going to participate in the King Malphite's arena competition. Do you guys remember my brother Tai Chui's C-level Malphite's brain skill? This skill is a global limited edition, with only 1,000 available. Once all the skills are obtained by players, it will activate a hidden skill effect. So far, 100 of the skills have been acquired by players. The system prompted my brother that he needs to use a pass to go to an arena map and compete with the other 99 players who have that skill. The winner will become the King Malphite of the remaining 99 players. They will have 3 chances per month to gather the intelligence of all 99 players onto themselves, as well as distribute their own intelligence among the 99 players in exchange for high defense and damage abilities. My brother is going to participate in this competition tomorrow, and I want to accompany him." Tuberculosis Rabbit gave Tai Chui, who was standing next to Ji, a strange look. "Well, good luck, try to bring back the title of King Malphite. I think with your brother's strength, others probably won't be a match for him." He had witnessed Tai Chui's strength. The Minotaur monsters outside the city were like toys in Tai Chui's hands. Tai Chui's skill made it so, the lower his intelligence, the stronger he was. You could say it was a perfect match for Tai Chui, at least his claw knife without charge probably wouldn't beat Tai Chui. Of course, it can't compare to Yi himself. "I see." Chen Yi nodded thoughtfully and then waved his hand with a smile. "Then I wish you both a smooth and triumphant return, see you next time." "We also wish Yi a triumphant return. It's getting late, you should head back." After Ji and the others had left, Chen Yi stowed his cane back into his backpack and mounted the nearby sled. He turned to Tuberculosis Rabbit and casually said, "Let's go. We rest tonight and prepare for tomorrow's wilderness journey." "Oh." Tuberculosis Rabbit looked at Yi's hands with a puzzled expression. If he remembered correctly, Yi's cane had the effect of seeing through one layer of obstacles. But, seeing how Yi acted all serious, he probably didn't have that in mind, and was just casually resting on it. Indeed, those with filthy minds see others as filthy too. He subconsciously chastised himself in his mind and then hurriedly hopped onto the sled. "Here we go, here we go."